This is Spirit Gym. Today's guest is YouTuber, spiritual teacher, and conscious influencer Aaron Abke. Aaron was born and raised as a pastor's son in Silicon Valley. He desired to work in church ministry like his father and took his first job as a pastor at just 22 years old. He spent 1 year working as a full-time worship pastor, but at 23, he felt called to leave his religion and pursue a deeper and more authentic spirituality. At 27, Aaron had a dramatic spiritual awakening that changed the course of his life. He was working as a signed fitness model in San Francisco and competing at the national level in men's bodybuilding. He completely walked out of his former life, seeking how to return to that state of self-realization permanently. Aaron's passion is teaching unity consciousness and spiritual awakening with the world, and he believes that unity consciousness and freedom from the ego is the next evolutionary leap for mankind and is available for anyone who truly desires it. Thank you for listening to this podcast, which would not be possible without you, our subscribers, and also our premier sponsors, Organifi, Bioptimizers, Paleo Valley, and Wild Pastures. The sponsors' special offers and discounts are mentioned throughout this episode, or you can visit the show notes page at paulchek.com/podcast. The topic of the conversation between Paul and Aaron in this episode today is the law of one.
All right, everybody. Well, as you heard from Penny's introduction, we are with an amazing man today, Aaron Abke. I first learned about Aaron from two of my very best friends in the whole world, and that is Chase and Mimi. And they have the Medicine podcast, and it's awesome. And they were telling me all about Aaron, and they turned me on to Aaron's excellent interview with Andre DeCoom on the Know Thyself podcast. And I've explored some of Aaron's other podcasts, and I really think Aaron has a great depth of knowledge on the topic of our podcast today, which is the law of one, the teachings of Ra. And Aaron's passion is densities, energy centers, spiritual balancing, and the teachings of Jesus versus Paul and the law of one, which we're going to get into today because those things are all very, very interesting to me. So Aaron, it is just a absolute pleasure to be able to hang out with you and have a nice dialogue together.
Likewise, man. Thank you for the introduction. And I couldn't agree more. I started hearing about you a lot from Chase and Megan, and of course, Ryan Sprague, our mutual friend.
Yes.
And every time I hang out with them, man, they never stop talking about Paul Chek.
Sorry.
I never get tired of hearing it, man. You've got some of the craziest, coolest, most epic stories that they've shared with me. And for many, many years now, I felt like I know you already because, again, my friends talk about you nonstop. Funny story, though, when I worked at Google as a personal trainer from 2016 to 2020, the first time I ever heard about you was from a fellow trainer at Google, a friend of mine named Bree Gwinner. Ironically, we have the same exact birthday.
Cool.
I don't know if that name rings a bell for you, but apparently she had either been to the Chek Institute or taken some of your courses and trainings, but she spoke really highly of you. And it wasn't until I became friends with Chase and Megan years later that they started bringing you up. And I'm like, yeah, I know that guy. And so I started diving into your content and have just enjoyed it for probably the last couple of years. Almost went to your workshop a year ago and that kind of fell through. But yeah, it's weird. It's weird connecting now because I already feel like we're close friends, but I guess this is our first official conversation.
Well, yeah, we had our podcast meeting to prep. So that was our first real one, but
That's true.
yeah, there's always a sense of soul harmony, especially when another soul is, in resonance with you with things like mission, vision, values, heart-centeredness, worldview. I don't think we're all more than a breath apart from each other, but the ego complex creates a nice little firewall, but it's, I've spent my life poking holes in that thing. Not that I don't have a very big ego, but my ego is well earned, so I embrace it wholeheartedly.
It's a well-trained ego, right?
Yeah, and I really, Jung's one of my great teachers and spirit guides, and one of Jung's primary teachings is it's not important to be perfect, but it is important to become whole. And so my ego has kept me alive since I was a child. So I'm not in a hurry to get rid of the ego, because I think a lot of people's ideas about the ego are just absolute new age horse shit and old religious ideas that are just as bad. So I think the thing to do is, individuation is all about the integration of the ego with the unconscious and the soul and the spirit. So I think if one's got an authentic love for themselves that shines out, people can have all the opinions they want. But if a person takes advantage of that nexus of consciousness and integrates it into their wholeness, then it becomes a very powerful source of inner strength and guidance. That's my experience.
One of my favorite quotes is, you've probably heard this, the ego makes a wonderful servant, but a horrible master.
Yes, it's true. And it's just getting from the master to the servant kind of relationship. And that's really the path of legitimate spiritual development or individuation in Jung's conception.
Yeah. I really look at the ego more as a verb than a noun. So it's like not something you can get rid of, because you can't get rid of a verb, You either do it or don't do it. And for me, the verb of the ego would be the mental activity of identifying with form and something separate or external from yourself.
Yeah.
And from there flows downstream the beliefs in lack and attachment and control and all of that. But the first kind of movement of the ego in a negative sense is to identify me with something outside of me. And so that's what I pay attention to. And just in terms of transcending the influence of the ego, it just means keeping your identity to itself, right? Keeping it to the I am principle.
Yeah.
And from there, the ego can become the servant. But when you let it run around and identify with forms, objects, roles, names, past memories, then it's going to be your master and you're not going to enjoy it.
Well, as I teach my students, it's important for everybody to be aware that the ego is largely composed of everybody else's ideas. Your mother's
100%.
ideas, your father's, your teachers, your education system, your religious ideology, et cetera, et cetera. So until one does the work to sift through and identify what's authentically in harmony with their mission, vision, dreams, and values, then you really don't have free will, because you're just acting out everybody else's ideologies and programming. And that's what leads people to a midlife crisis and a dark night of the soul and whatever it takes for the soul to break through to become itself, its authentic self. And, what you said about, the ego as a verb, that is also extremely true of God. You can't know God without becoming God. And if you become God, there is no subject-object duality. There's no one there to report what you found.
Right.
So anything said about what God wants or demands is all through some other ego. And I think that's the chief challenge that religion has to come to grips with, because all the commandments and thou shalt and you're going to burn in hell if you do this or whatever the religions are full of is all assumed to be what God said or what God wants. But it's impossible, because you can't. The only way you can know what God says or wants is to experience love, because that is the verb of God. So any noun is a departure from the truth of Great Spirit or Source. And that's something that it takes a lot of maturity to grow up to, because if you practice that and live that, then you have to become an adult and take responsibility for loving and nurturing yourself, or you're always going to be addicted to some group ideology. And that means you're in a belief system, and by definition, a belief system is closed. So you stop asking questions and thinking for yourself, and that keeps you encapsulated in the child archetype. And that's what we have a big problem with in the world today.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. We were talking about some of the philosophers before the show just now, Plotinus, Aquinas, Aristotle. And there's a theory I really enjoy from, I believe it was Aristotle, and Aquinas kind of took it a little bit further, but the whole idea of hylomorphism, he has these distinctions, and one of them is act versus potency. And it's this idea that everything has a potential and an actuality.
Yeah.
And so I think Aristotle first posited that God is the only being in the universe that is pure actuality with no potentiality, meaning that there's nothing of God that is unrevealed or unmanifested. Like God can't change its nature like we can change. Like I can grow and evolve into a new potential of myself, but God cannot. God can't evolve because God is pure actuality. And that to me speaks to the verb idea that I like to call it verb consciousness, actually, that everything in reality is actually a verb. It's all vibration, it's all energy and motion in the physical universe, at least. And so that speaks to it's a microcosm of the macrocosm, right? That God is also like that. God is also always in activity, never never in potential. And so this actually touches on a little bit of the Paul Jesus stuff with salvation by faith alone or salvation by works. When you look at Jesus's gospel, he was teaching a heavy works-based gospel of how you've got to love people. You got to forgive people. You can't just call me Lord, Lord, and not do what I say. You can't just say you believe things and not act upon them. Faith without works is dead. And then, of course, Paul comes a few decades later and says, no, we're saved by faith alone, apart from works, just by grace. And to me, that's the potential versus actuality. Like faith is good. We need faith in God, trust in God. Absolutely. But that's sort of just the potentiality, not the actuality. We got to live that faith and it needs to come through us in demonstration in some way. Because if you can't live what you say you believe, you don't really believe it. And that's what faith without works is dead means to me.
Well, I'd like to just throw you a curveball.
Please.
Because your introductory statement there on God as action versus potentiality, it does something very interesting. Why don't you go ahead and state that again?
Yeah, so act versus potency is the way that Aristotle defined it, saying that God is the only being that is pure actuality with no potentiality, compared to you and I or anything in the physical universe is always in a state of change and evolution. But God is the only being that's not in a stage of change or evolution, is the idea.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. So here's my thoughts on that. First of all, that's a statement about what God is. So it's already a noun.
Mm-hmm.
That's a problem. Second of all, by definition, God is that for which there is no other. God is the only being that can create and sustain itself.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So because God is unconditional love, that is infinite. Nobody can know an infinite unless you become it, and then there's no you. Second of all, there is God the manifest, which is all things that you can know, weigh or measure or see or be.
Yeah.
And that's in Tantra, that's the domain of Shiva. And then Shakti is the intelligent energy, the womb of creation, the spirit dimension for which you cannot measure because it's ultimately the absolute. In quantum physics, that would be the wave domain.
Mm-hmm.
And then above that, you have that which is neither Shakti nor Shiva, which is undifferentiated, the absolute, which is unadulterated potential. God has an infinite potential to become anything it can dream or we can dream. So I think that to separate potentiality and actuation is to keep God in a state of duality and oversee or miss the potential for God to be anything it possibly dreams, because that which gives birth to it all, if it's unconditional love, mathematically, that's a zero. So a beautiful definition of God that Joseph Campbell and others give is God is an infinite sphere whose circumference is nowhere and a center whose presence is everywhere.
Yeah, I love that quote.
So right there, if we have an infinite sphere whose circumference is nowhere, it has the potential to be in any center, anywhere, and everywhere. Mm-hmm. So we see that both potential and actuality are equal realities. Mm-hmm. And if God is all actuality, for something to be actuality, it means it's already in a state of energy. It's already in a state of movement. And all actuality has to come from potential. You can't have an electrical charge without a potential. A battery holds the potential that creates the circuit. When the battery runs dead, loses its potential, you've got no capacity for flow. So one of the things that has always concerned me is that a lot of these philosophers and religious people say things about God that actually separate God from the experience of life itself or from creation itself. But if God is that for which there is no other, there's no possible way that you can have anything that isn't God. It's impossible.
Right.
I tell my students, if God was cookie dough, then everything in the universe would be some derivation of cookie dough. So we're these are interesting things because they challenge us to question, but ultimately the deepest I've gone into God is where there is absolutely nothing. There's no subject, there's no object, there's no light, there's no dark. And when you come out of an experience like that, the first question that rises in my mind and probably others is, did I just die?
At the 5-MEO trip.
Well, my first really profound experience of that experience was completely drug-free.
Nice, as it should be.
It came by way of Tai Chi. And
Wow.
I was just doing my normal daily Tai Chi routine, which I did sometimes twice a day for 18 years. And I worked with a really very profound master named Master Fong Ha. And he took me deep enough in that he said, you can go on your own now, you have what you need. But I was doing Tai Chi as the sun was going down one day, right next to my water charger in my front yard. And I had no expectation of anything happening whatsoever. It was just another day after work. And I was doing a technique called the Tai Chi ruler, which I taught Andre Decum, which was fun to teach him that. He really liked the simplicity of it. But I was just, the sun was going down. So it was probably about 5:15, 5:30, I would say. And then the next thing I know, Angie's coming down the stairs down into the lower rock garden where I was at. And she's going, Paul, we've been calling you for over an hour to come to dinner. And, the house is like 40 feet from me. So normally when they call me, I hear them clear as a bell. And I remember the sound of her voice bringing me back into kind of bodily awareness. And the first thing that hit me was that I was high as a kite. I felt like I was on like 5 hits of LSD, but I was just on nothing except Tai Chi. And it was very shocking because, the Tai Chi ruler is a very active process. You've ever seen the Tai Chi ruler practice?
I don't know if I have, but I've seen a lot of Tai Chi.
Well, you hold what looks like a ruler and it connects the 2 heart meridians, and you move in cycle with your breathing, and it harmonizes your brain, your heart, and your intestinal tract, which are your biological oscillators. So it brings you into a state of coherence. And I had been out there for over an hour and 40 minutes. And when I started, the sunset was still happening. There was plenty of light. Angie's standing there at like 7:40 in the evening. It's pitch black. The grass is all wet. I got dew on my sweater. And I was trying to backtrack and say, where was I and how did this happen? And I just remember relaxing. And then all of a sudden I was in a place with no name. I was in utter emptiness or even non-being. There was no Paul, there was no conception, there was no light, there was no dark. And what baffled me is, how did my body keep doing this practice for that long when I wasn't even there? And I still don't know the answer.
We call that non-doership.
Yeah, non-doership. So, Lao Tzu would call that no mind, But anyhow, we've got lots to get into, these things we're talking about. I've spent my life researching this because the number of people whose health issues I track back to beliefs about God is shocking.
Wow,
So
yeah.
I spent many years studying all the world's religions and philosophy and metaphysics and quantum physics and psychology and depth psychology and shamanism and everything you can imagine, because I felt like it was my job to get to the bottom of what is causing all this separation and confusion in people. And I coupled that with, I learned to meditate at age 12 when I went to the Self-Realization Fellowship. My mother joined the Self-Realization Fellowship when I was 12.
Cool. I've done that too.
Yeah, and then I went to the summer camp with the monks when I was 15, and then many, many things since then, and including a long string of plant medicine explorations of many, many years. But I've tried to make sure that I took both paths: meditation, Tai Chi, Qigong, art therapy, contemplative meditation, and then the plant medicine path as well, so I could weigh the two out and see what are the differences, what are the things that are in harmony. And that was very important to me to do, so that people didn't just write me off as a druggie or something,
Yeah. Well, I love that you said that, because as a third generation pastor's kid growing up in church my whole life, number one, I had a lot of beliefs about God, and probably still do have some lingering that are just terribly destructive and prevent true spiritual growth from taking place. Because how do you grow towards something you're terrified of or feel ashamed of? It's very much a spiritual dead end. And to your point on the philosophers, I agree completely that when we're talking about the absolute plane, there is no differentiation at all in God. And it's interesting to read the philosophers where they sort of, some of them will sort of acknowledge that, but they're like, but we live in the relative plane where there is differentiation. So what good does it help us to talk about how in the absolute plane, there's nothing but, oneness and non-linearity and stuff. We're in this plane. So let's talk about how this plane functions. And I get that. But like you said earlier, like you've got to at some point go beyond the head knowledge and go to the direct experience of God, which is why I think we're both big Plotinus fans.
Yes.
Because in Neoplatonism, he posited like, hey, God is actually the absolute, the one, they call it. And the entire purpose of existence is to experience or achieve union with the one, the absolute. Mystical union. And so Plotinus to me is a very unique philosopher in that he brought in more of that heart element to philosophy. Where, hey, the whole purpose of all of this knowledge is really to have the direct gnosis of the divine itself.
Yeah. Well, Plotinus was really a mystic. Sometimes he's referred to as a metaphysician. Right. I don't know if you know this about Plotinus, but did you know he is the most commonly referenced philosopher by all quantum physicists?
Wow, I did not know that.
I've probably read 150 books on quantum physics, and his name comes up constantly. Amazing. They refer back to Plotinus all the time, and it's what really makes me happy is to see that they're actually reading Plotinus,
Yeah.
And generally what happens is they come to these impasses in all their calculations and equations and trying to figure it all out. So they go hunting into the deep philosophers. A lot of them, I think Aaron Schrodinger read the Tao Te Ching and studied the teachings of Lao Tzu, and many of these top guys did. Wolfgang Pauli worked for 27 years directly with Carl Jung, first as a patient, but then to collectively try to identify what the psyche actually is. And Pauli was also looking into these Eastern philosophies, and Jung was very deeply skilled in them. So you can imagine the many conversations. In fact, I've read a whole book of the meetings of Jung and Pauli on the sort of the steps they took to identify what the psyche is. And it's all very, very interesting stuff. But what I want to do, Aaron, to begin our actual journey into the podcast concepts that we wanted to talk about today, because we're going to be talking about Ra a lot. I have had Edmund Knighton on my podcast multiple times now. He's very, very skilled in Ra, but he's also a master of Steiner's teachings. So my guests are probably familiar with Ra, but not really anything other than just hearing Ra. So my first question is, what and who is Ra, so that as we go through the podcast, listeners know exactly what we're talking about and don't try to fill in the blanks with something.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I like to often say that the name Ra is kind of like the name Essenes, in that we all know this Qumran Dead Sea Scroll group as the Essenes, and they've been even written about in the first century as Essenes, but we don't actually find that name anywhere in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And so scholars know that whatever this group, whoever they were, they didn't call themselves Essenes. And I've recently been teaching a lot about this, that their self-designation was the Ebionim, which in Hebrew means the poor ones. But it's like that for Ra as well, in that Ra doesn't consider themselves that name. They're just using that name because it's what was apparently given to them by the Egyptians. So the story is that they came to Earth 11, 12,000 years ago to visit the Egyptians. And they said that, one of the big rules of the positive polarity, as you know, Paul, is that they do not want to infringe on free will, because that's very depolarizing for a positive entity. And it's actually depolarizing for a negative entity to an extent, in that they have to manipulate free will in a very deceptive way. They can't just, go around locking people up or something. But especially for the positive polarity, they've got to really honor free will. And so this extraterrestrial civilization known as Ra in the Law of One came to Egypt in those times because they were a very pantheistic culture, they say. And so they already believed that everything is God, which is basically the main tenet of the Law of One. There's only one infinite creator, which is manifest as all things. And so they came to the Egyptians and began teaching them the Law of One philosophy. And the interesting thing for me, Paul, is that in the Law of One, they describe how the Egyptians were only living about 30 years at that time, their expected lifespan. And I think they say it's because of a lot of the disease and bacteria from the Nile River at that time or something like that. But I went to the Egypt Museum in Denver years ago when I lived in Denver. And I was kind of surprised to see that one of the sarcophaguses on display, they have these little infographic things, right? You can read. And it said, this mummy is, I can't remember how many thousands of years old, but it said the life expectancy of these times was about 30, 35 years old. And so this mummy, whoever this person was that died, was something like 33 years old, 32 years old when they died. And that very much corroborates what Ra says in the Law of One, that the Egyptians were caught in this kind of perpetual spiritual childhood, where anybody who's at least in your 30s or beyond, as I'm learning, you kind of figure out like, oh yeah, like you really don't know who you are at all until maybe your 30s, and you're kind of starting to get to know yourself. It takes a lot of human incarnation experience to really get your bearings, for most people at least. So it makes sense that Ra, being a positively polarized extraterrestrial civilization that's here on Earth to be of service and monitoring our planet, would say, wow, we got a big, big problem here. This culture is stuck in this perpetual spiritual infancy. Let's go down and teach them the Law of One. Let's teach them how to heal with pyramid technology and all this stuff. So that's what they tried to do. And they said that they built the pyramids of Giza that we see today as these healing/initiation centers. I believe it's the king's chamber for initiation and the queen's chamber for physical healing. But they were trying to show them how to use these technologies to heal the distortions in their energy centers and thus alleviate disease and live a longer life so they could actually grow spiritually. And what they say happened was the upper class aristocrats of those times were starting to use the Law of One philosophy to create separation and power between themselves and the common people. Like, hey, we're the ones who dispense the Law of One philosophy or whatever it was. And so they realized they were beginning to be in a hypocritical position because their knowledge was being weaponized for negative purposes. And so that's when they decided to leave Egypt and return back to, the cosmos, monitoring our planet until they could find a new group of people that were harmonious enough in orientation that they believed they wouldn't corrupt the law of one for power anymore. So that's what they found in the 1980s, supposedly, with Carl, Don, and Jim McCarty, the LNL research group. And Ra essentially is a sixth density social memory complex from the planet Venus. A social memory complex just means like a group mind. So that the idea is like as planets evolve in consciousness, even as we evolve on this planet into the fourth density, there's a phenomenon that begins called telepathy, where minds start to share information more freely. And as that continues to evolve, we eventually kind of all can read each other's minds. And that phenomenon eventually culminates in a social memory complex where the entire planet, the civilization, is kind of all sharing one mind, or like the Akashic records of humanity. And that's what Ra is from the sixth density, so very, very advanced compared to where we are. And they came to our planet to be of service and are still attempting to do that based on the work of LNL research.
Hi, everybody. I'm sure you've heard me bragging about Paleo Valley over the years of listening to my podcast, and there's a very good reason for that. Not only do I love the genius of Autumn Smith, a holistic nutritionist, but her products are phenomenally good. My kids love them. I love them, and we all use them every day. My students love them. My clients love them, and they are absolutely top notch. One of my kids' favorite snacks is Paleo Valley's bone broth in chocolate. They love to make their hot chocolate drink themselves simply by whisking up collagen-rich protein powder in a mug of hot water. And I'm happy to let them indulge, as I know it is packed full of great nutrition for them in the disguise of a sweet treat. Even us big kids love our sweet treats. And isn't it great when we can enjoy something that not only tastes great, but is truly great for us? Paleo Valley's 100% grass-fed bone broth protein is the only of its kind made from truly grass-fed cows raised on pesticide-free grass pastures. It's made from bones, not hides, slowly simmered to extract the proteins and nutrients. Gluten-free, grain-free, soy-free, and dairy-free, the chocolate mix includes organic coconut milk powder, organic cacao bean, organic monk fruit that makes a sweet, creamy, delicious drink that my kids, family, and friends just can't get enough of. You can also add to smoothies, use it in baking, or mix it with your coffee for a healthy mocha treat. Paleo Valley's bone broth protein is also available in vanilla and unflavored. And I promise you, not only will you love this stuff, your kids will love it. You can giggle and laugh because they think they're getting a sweet dessert right before bed, but they will love it and sleep great. And boy, do we parents love it when our kids sleep great. Enjoy Paleo Valley's amazing products.
Bone broth protein comes in vanilla, an unflavored option, great for adding a boost to your baking soups and stews, and also their new and delicious salted caramel flavor, which is now the favorite in the Chek household. Try Paleo Valley's bone broth protein and save 15% on your purchase by going to paleovalley.com/Chek15. That's paleovalley.com/CHEK15. We hope you enjoy Paleo Valley's bone broth protein just as much as we do.
Yeah, very interesting. It's interesting. I'm grateful that I started off with that, because somehow in my study of the Ra series, the Ra books, I overlooked the fact that they came from Venus and were external to the Egyptians. And I thought that they actually were the Egyptians, that they incarnated here, that they built the temples. And I didn't realize that they came to the Egyptians. So, the series of books, I believe it's 5 books, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's a lot.
Session.
Yeah. It's a lot to kind of remember it all, because it took me a long time to get through them. But it's great. That's why I like these conversations, because it helps me kind of straighten out. Your memory can do funny things too. You can think you remember something, but then you go read it again, go, oh my God, that's not what I thought it was.
It happens to me all the time.
Yeah. And that's very interesting. Now, we were going to talk about this later, but I'll put it on the table now in brief, and we can get to it in more deep depth later. You're using a term that very few people have any understanding of or can even comprehend, which is densities. Most people wouldn't know the difference between the first density and the 100th density, or the 6th or the 10th, and there's so many models, which is what we'll talk about later. But could you please give a clear definition of what you mean by the term density, and what are the densities starting from the lowest to where Ra is at least, so we can make a correlation between where we are at as a conscious, if you think of humanity as a being, where are we as a conscious being, and how does that correlate to where Ra came from?
Yeah, I love talking about the densities. To me, it's the most fascinating model of metaphysics that I've come across for helping us understand the nature of the evolution of the soul and reincarnation and these kind of topics we love to discuss. So, formal definition of density for me would be, I guess you could say, the rate of vibration or speed of vibration of the photon. This is sort of what Ra discusses, is that consciousness evolves in 7 major stages, like there are 7 major notes on a musical scale. Of course, there's infinite gradations between every note, just like there are between every density.
Like a rainbow.
But 7 colors of the rainbow, 7 notes on the musical scale. This is an archetype in creation.
7
and
chakras.
7 energy centers.
Yeah.
You got it. So the Law 1 doesn't say this, but this is the way I understand it, is that the densities are like the chakras of the universe. They're everywhere. They're not located in any one place, but they're omnipresent in potential. And so a density refers to how fast the photon is vibrating. The example I like to give is, like, I have a photon over here that's vibrating 100 times per second. I have one over here that's vibrating 1,000,000 times per second. Which photon has a greater density of light? Obviously, the one that's vibrating more. And so the idea is with densities that the more light there is, the more information there is. And the more information there is, the more ability consciousness has to express itself.
Mm-hmm.
So every density represents a higher level of potential expression for consciousness.
Yeah.
And this really, to me, makes sense out of where we are as a human species, is that Ra says, you are a 3rd density planet evolving towards the 4th density. And that was back in the 80s. And they said that the graduation from 3rd to 4th would begin around 2011, 2012. We had the whole Mayan calendar thing. So something kicked off energetically on our planet around that year. And I think we would all agree we've kind of been in this quantum leap of growth and shadow work on our planet since around 2012. And so we're moving from the 3rd chakra in consciousness to the 4th. So the idea is, like, every creature is born with certain amount of chakras in activation.
Yeah.
So a 2nd density life form, like an animal, like a dog, only has the first 2 chakras in activation. And they have all of them in potential.
Yeah.
But a dog or an animal is working towards activating that 3rd energy center, meaning they're working towards becoming self-aware like a human being.
Yeah.
Human beings are born with the first 3 in activation, and we're working on getting into the heart and activating the green ray energy center, which is the 4th density of consciousness. So we talk a lot about 4th density consciousness on my YouTube channel and on my private platform, because to me, it's the whole purpose of humanity at this point in time, is we've got to evolve into this awareness of oneness and be able to live from the heart. And most people right now on our planet probably only have an active green ray energy center, 5% of the time. Most of the time it's shut off because they're thinking very selfishly or self-focusedly and not turning their attention outward to love others and serve others. And so that's really what turns the heart chakra on, is being of service and recognizing your oneness with other beings.
Yeah, there's lots I could go into there, but this is why I say love is the verb of God. And when you consider the level of consciousness, have you by chance ever read the book Streams of Wisdom by Dustin DePerna?
No.
Phenomenal book. It's all about the evolution of consciousness, and it looks at many different systems from around the world. he's a Ken Wilber initiate and teacher in his own right. It's an excellent book, though. But I forgot what I was going to reference from that book. But
something about love.
Well, I think the thing that oh yes, because he shows different studies looking at the conscious evolution of so-called spiritual masters and gurus all over the world. And what they found is most of them were centered in their second or third chakra, and that they were still very self-oriented, and that there was a real tendency to use their abilities and gifts to get people to do things that were ultimately somehow in service to or a benefit to them, kind of like a politician.
Oh, yeah.
And Osho said the same thing in many different ways. But it's an interesting reality because the percentage of the population that is still in the first, second, or third, as you said, is quite high.
It's not small.
No, and it creates a lot of the issues that we have in the world, which of course are, as we will get into, the catalysts that inspire us to grow. But something you said reminded me of a little paradox I thought I would share with you. You're talking about densities as vibrations of light and higher vibrations, which, by the way, are you familiar with William A. Tiller's work?
No.
Well, you might find the book Science and Human Transformation quite mind-blowing. William A. Tiller was a famous scientist, a materials scientist, a professor and researcher at Stanford University, and awarded many awards for his scientific achievements. He died recently, unfortunately, but he wrote several good books. Science and Human Transformation is a very good one, but he actually was probably the first person to calculate mathematically that as you go up each chakra, the speed of light goes up many times. And he gave the mathematical calculations. If not in Science and Human Transformation, one of his other books is just loaded with mathematical equations. He was involved.
Quick question for you, Paul.
Yeah.
Do you remember what he says the mathematical difference is between the third and the fourth energy
I
center?
don't, but it wasn't strictly exponential. For example, you could go from first to second chakra and get a doubling of the speed of light. But if I remember from my studies of his work, sometimes there was a 4 times the speed of light jump from one chakra to the next.
This is crazy, dude. This is so crazy. Do you know the Hawkins scale?
Yes, I've studied all of David Hawkins' books. They're right here in my library.
So the Hawkins scale from 0 to 1,000, to me, I look at that as like, here's the third density spectrum of energy that's available. So 1,000 would be like, you've maxed out what's possible in third density, or at least for a third density body. One of the ideas in the law of one I'm sure you're familiar with is like the physical body, the physical vehicle must evolve to keep up with the consciousness. So that it can be a proper conduit for the level of consciousness or light coming in. And so if 0 to 1,000 is third density, I asked myself years ago, like, what would be the energy spectrum and compared to that for fourth density and fifth density? And I used muscle testing on a number of people to figure this out. And a spiritual mentor of mine she's a functional symmetry master, and she does almost all her healing modality comes through muscle testing. So I've learned a thing or two from her about how to do it properly. But when I tested out the difference of energy levels from third to fourth chakra, or third to fourth density rather, the calibration came back that the fourth density would span from 1,000 at the beginning to 5,000. So as far up to 5x the amount of energy available in third density, a fourth density being can channel. And so when you said that his work showed some people were up to 4x, I'm like, that's right in the range of what the muscle testing showed. So I find that to be a pretty cool little synchronicity there.
Yeah, it wasn't some people. It was the flow of energy and information through the chakra system based on the structure of the chakras, not respective to a given person, but how the chakras function as step down and step up transformers. He has very comprehensive models, which I integrated into my teachings at the Chek Institute. Because most people don't know that each chakra is actually 3 chakras. It's not one chakra. And he showed this, and there's been good research looking into this with various type of imagery. I'm trying to remember the lady's name. Infinite Mind is her first big successful book, but if her name comes to me, she was the first one to actually scientifically prove the existence of chakras, and she did it at UCLA. Her book Infinite Mind goes into all that.
Oh, wow.
But anyhow, what Tiller was doing is just simply analyzing the chakras from a scientific perspective, and then looking at what's the difference in conductivity of the flow of energy and information from one to the next. And part of the challenge, of course, is all the kind of standard scientists thought it was a bunch of bullshit because they believe nothing can move faster than the speed of light. But he, like Fred Alan Wolf, said the speed of light, as we know it in classical physics, is the speed limit for manifestation in a three-dimensional reality. But because these other frequencies are so high in intensity, they move through our dimension like quarks move through solid lead, like it's not even there. Yeah. So all these densities are nested inside of each other, and they're inside of all of us all the time, as you know.
Yeah, we all contain the full densities in potential within us. And again, our chakras are miniature versions of each density within us. So I think the important thing Ra says on this topic is, like, once you truly activate the green ray, the heart chakra, and by the way, they say that the percentage of activation you need to be eligible for graduation to the fourth density after this incarnation
51%,
is 51%. Yeah. So I always find that to be really great news, because, what if the threshold was like 90%?
There'd be no
We'd
one
have
graduating.
to spend a whole lot more human lifetimes here. Exactly. But it's like, hey, you just need to be a little bit more in the heart than you're not. Like, that's a pretty merciful standard from the universe, I think.
Well, it is, considering that we are the universe too. We got to be careful about separating ourselves from the universe.
Right. Just in terms of the rule structure that, I think when we look at what Ra teaches on fourth density consciousness, or actually what I like to do is look at, I'm a big time fan and student of A Course in Miracles and the Law of One.
Yeah, good.
And I find those two texts to just be phenomenal kind of dance partners, because the Law of One really lays out like the what and the why of the universe. And that means, like, what is the universe and why are we here? What are we all doing here? What's the greater purpose of it all? Law of One is the best text I've come across for answering those questions.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
But then the Course answers the how of, like, okay, how do you actually succeed at this density level you're at and get to the fourth? It's all about forgiveness, as you know, and loving others. And really the idea that I think is most important for me from the Course is, like, you can't keep what you're not constantly giving away, because as we said at the beginning, God is a verb. God is the activity of love itself.
Yeah.
And so if you're not giving love, you won't be able to experience love because you're the source of it. Yeah. And so if you don't give it, how can you know you have it? Whereas if you give it, you've proven you have it. That to me is the key to unlocking the heart chakra and graduating to fourth density. It's like, be concerned with the giving of love, not just the learning about it, or even not even just doing your own shadow work. Like, shadow work's super important, but I've spent a lot of years myself focusing so much on my own healing and forgetting that, hey, a lot of my healing is just concerned with getting beyond myself and loving others and being of service. And that is, according to Ra, the fastest way to polarize on the positive polarity. And that's why they call it the service to others polarity.
Yeah, there's a few things I'd like to share in that regard. One, look, I've been studying the heart chakra for my not the heart chakra, all the chakras, because I've been using this model for healing, and I've done countless healings for people and teach my students this type of work and teach workshops on it. But there's a lot of confusion about the chakra system. And one of the things that's important for everybody to understand is that the heart chakra actually integrates the lower three and the upper three.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons it's important to focus on love as a practice is because you can actually, through that practice, bring harmony, balance, coherence, and clarity into all 7 chakras through the 4th, because it is the nexus through which they all work.
Yeah.
And one of the things that religions in general do is they de-emphasize the self, and Christians and people of the Abrahamic religion often get themselves in trouble by loving everybody else, but avoiding the love of self. And this is why I teach I before we always, because you can't love someone else more than you can love yourself. And if you're taking care of other people at the expense of yourself, you're actually making yourself a liability. Because if you're a parent, for example, and you're not taking care of yourself, but you're doing everything for your kids and your family, you're decreasing your agency every day to the point that you're actually going to end up becoming someone with an illness, a disease, or a problem that now makes you codependent upon them. So I think one of the things that we always have to be conscious of is how important it is to genuinely love and care for ourselves as the basis for having the energy, the agency, and the love to give others. Or we play a very dangerous religious game, and that is to give yourself away in service to others, which is really like trying to get brownie points so God won't burn you in hell. It's a very childish approach to spiritual evolution, and it leads to countless problems for which I could do 80 podcasts on.
You and me both.
Yeah. So my point was just that the heart chakra is, I think, the most important one, because it's the nexus point for the marriage of self and other, I, we, all, right? And without the heart, there's no impetus to connect to persons, places, things, anything outside of your animal survival, right? The heart is really what is the gateway to realizing who and what you really are. I think that's why love is so important. And a lot of people, as you know, they don't know how to love themselves, and therefore they don't really know how to love others.
It's probably the biggest problem on our planet, actually.
Yeah, and you can thank a lot of religious ideology for exactly that.
Oh, yeah.
And it's very, very sad. But as Ra would say, that's a catalyst, and it gives us a growth potential. But here's the paradox I was going to give you. Do you know what the mass of a photon is?
Yeah, I used to know the answer to this. I mean, I think it's nothing, right?
It's 0.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's your paradox. How can you make photons vibrate at faster and faster rates when there's nothing there to vibrate?
Well, now we get into the quantum realm, right? Wave-particle duality.
Yeah, we do. And that's why I don't know if you've ever read this book, but I'd highly recommend it to you. The Quantum Revelation by Paul Levy. It's fucking mind-blowing.
Oh, I've heard of that, yeah.
I've interviewed him on the book, and I've read it 4 times and listened to it on audio, probably just as many. And I have paid notebooks full of notes from it because it's so deep and so profound. I tried listening. Most of the books I listen to while I lift weights, because I've been lifting weights so long, I don't have to think when I lift weights. But I couldn't lift weights because I'd be like doing a deadlift and he'd say something and it would be so deep and profound, my muscles would go weak and I could barely hold the bar because my mind was so activated, there was nothing left for my muscles. And it was just like, whoa, wait a minute, I need to go sit under a really tall tree for a day or two to really go into contemplative meditation. So that book gave me hundreds of hours of contemplative meditations to look into.
Amazing.
But and my spirit
What's the basic premise?
Well, the basic premise is that the degree of mystery and magic that's going on based on the findings of quantum physics is so far beyond most people's mindset or capacity to comprehend that when you take the findings of quantum physics and look at them from a spiritual perspective, it is so mind-blowing. And it shows that we're operating at so far below our potential and that we're so caught in materialistic ideas that it's extremely dangerous. But once we really realize what quantum physics is telling us, it gives us an understanding that there is no separation between us and source.
Yeah.
And that we have the ability to create so far beyond what we perceive that it's mind-boggling. And it just gives you the scientific basis for the philosophical and psychological and spiritual orientation that it points to.
Mm-hmm.
It's really amazing.
I'm sure you know this section in the Law of One where they kind of explain how they built the pyramids. Do you remember that?
Yeah, the thought forms.
Yeah, and they just the idea that they say all energy is intelligent, so they call it intelligent energy.
Yeah.
And if you know how to communicate to energy, you can send wishes or commands to be carried out and it will obey. And that's essentially what they said they did to build the pyramids.
Well, that's how we build our bodies. All you got to do is look at the effect of the psyche on your body. And if you keep thinking negative thoughts about yourself, your body will mirror that, and posture, facial gesture, movement, heart pressure, blood rate, and every other physiological function, and it does it instantly. So we are the pyramid of our own creation.
Yeah.
But I wanted to share something very interesting with you. Do you know who Freddie Silva is?
Nope.
Freddie Silva is real famous on Gaia, but he takes people on expeditions into Egypt. He's been studying ancient healing sites, ancient architecture, and written many books on it. He's a very, knowledgeable guy about, all the sacred scriptures, the history, these scientific investigations into the age of things like the Sphinx, etc. He does tours and takes people all the time. He's produced a number of documentaries. But I did a podcast with him and I talked about what Ra said. And I proposed to him what Ra said. And I said, Freddie, what do you think? Because there's so many things about the pyramids that makes it dead clear human beings did not build the pyramids. And to think that they did means you're just dangerously uneducated. And after I told him what Ra said, he said something really wild. And I want to share it with you because what he does, he can speak many languages and he goes to the natives of the countries that he visits, and he speaks to them about their folklore and about the stories that were passed down. And here's what he said. He said, well, Paul, that's very interesting that you say that, because when I was speaking to the villagers and the natives in the region of the Great Pyramid and surrounding areas, and I asked them, did your ancestors see these pyramids being built? They said, no. We woke up one day and they were there.
Wow.
And isn't that just wild? They literally said they went to bed one night. When they woke up the next morning, the Great Pyramid was there, totally complete. There was no history of or observation of, and that would, for humans to build that would have probably taken 150 years.
Yeah.
Some of these great temples like that we've had throughout history have taken, 4 or 5 generations of master builders to build. And they're not anything like the Great Pyramid. But
nothing close.
It really lended credence to what Ra said. And I thought that was phenomenal to hear from Freddie Silva of all people, because it shocked me. I didn't expect that from him at all.
Well, it totally resonates because there's another connection there that I just had with the raw material. They mention in stress, they being Ra, how much they didn't want to be taken as gods or deified. And they tried really carefully not to appear like gods that are superior to the Egyptians, but to really show the sameness and the oneness between them. And so it makes sense that if they did build those pyramids through thought, they probably would have done it in the middle of the night so that nobody could see. Because if these Egyptians watched, these extraterrestrial beings like poof, this giant pyramid into existence from their mind, or however it would have looked, they would have for sure been worshiping them as gods. I mean, they did that already, which is why they named them Ra. But that would have been a dead ringer of like, oh, we definitely can't let them see us do this if we want to stay on the same playing field with them.
If you've been listening to this podcast for any length of time, you've probably heard Paul raving about one of his absolute go-to supplements, P3OM from Bioptimizers. Well, they've given it a new name, Probiotic Breakthrough. It's the same amazing formulation, just with a new name. Here's a chat that Paul and Wayne had about Probiotic Breakthrough before it changed its name.
Bioptimizers makes an amazing product called P3OM, which is a prebiotic product. And it's amazing for not only helping repopulate the gut with friendly bacteria, but as Wade will tell you, it's really, really an amazing product in case you ever feel like you're getting any kind of food poisoning or illness coming on. And Wade's right here with me, and he's the co-founder of Bioptimizers, and he knows more about P3OM than anybody. But I can tell you this, I've had nothing but excellent results and nothing but positive feedback from all my clients and friends that I've turned on to P3OM. So Wade, tell us a little bit about P3OM and why it works so well.
Well, P3M we call it the Navy SEAL of probiotics.
Amen.
Basically, its job is to kick out the bad guys in your body. Food poisoning is one of those things from bad bacteria. What we've done is we've taken an aggressive strain of L. plantarum. We put it into toxic soup, ran a sine wave to keep a few of them alive. And the few survivors we grow in very specialized medium to make a cultured, patented enzyme that has extraordinary powers. Number one, it survives the intestinal tract.
Yes.
And number two, it absolutely hunts down pathogens in the body, bacteria, viruses, these type of things. And this is really where the future of probiotics is. It is about developing and culturing and creating super strains of probiotic, very much like the Navy SEALs goes through a training, and these individuals have extraordinary powers to deal with chaos. And in today's world where we want to improve our immunity and our function and our gut health, P3OM is head and shoulders above any probiotic out there.
So my understanding is it can be used daily as a supplement, but it can also be used in larger quantities as a defense measure.
We've tested this literally with over 100 of our friends who have been suffering from various times of food poisoning. And a handful of those guys, when you're in food poisoning, and within 20 to 30 minutes, you complete recovery.
That's awesome. And I've seen it happen myself. Angie has felt bad a number of times, and several of people in the house or family have. And I say, take 10. If that doesn't feel good in an hour, take 20. And you've told me you can't overdose on them, which is amazing.
Yeah, that's the beauty of P3OM. You can't take too much. They'll fight off the bad guys, and they'll get your digestion rocking and rolling the way it should.
So if you want to have a healthy gut and you want some defense, carry P3OM with you wherever you go, airplanes, cars, business meetings, hotels, conferences, and you've got your Navy SEALs in the bottle, and they're ready for you anytime. Wade, how do we get a hold of your amazing P3OM product?
Super easy. Just go to www.bioptimizers.com/living4D and put in Paul10 for your 10% discount code. That's BIOPTIMIZERS.com/living4D and Paul10 for your discount code.
You got it. There you go. Try it. You'll love it. I use them. I can't tell you enough how much I love this product. I think it's a genius product. And you've heard it right from the master himself. Get your P3OM. Let us know how you feel about it. Lots of love.
Now, back to the light thing. Yeah, I posted the paradox for you because it is really a paradox. And it really does, if you understand that and you're not just using words because they're commonly traded, something interesting occurs. And what I did is, having studied quantum physics and quite a lot about light, I read Walter Russell's book, I think it's called The Secret of Light or The Mystery of Light. I've studied
I love that book.
I studied all of Walter Russell's teaching. Then I did his 1-year home study course. And Walter Russell goes very, very deep into light.
He's amazing.
But it was very interesting because I was having, Walter Russell, by the way, was a Christian that did not like Christians for all the reasons that he shouldn't have liked them.
Sounds like we're cut from the same cloth.
Yeah. It's sad, really. And even Steiner goes on at length about how Christianity had been taken over by Ahriman. But one person I spoke to, are you familiar with the electric universe theory?
Yeah,
because I study that a lot, and I've interviewed Walt Thornhill twice. Unfortunately, he died a couple of years ago, which was sad. But he was the chief scientist for the electric universe. And in my conversation with him, we were talking about photons. But one of the things that the electric universe brings up that lends itself to the paradox, and I think this is worth discussing because it helps show you got to be careful about just locking onto shit and believing it. But Einstein's kind of quantization of heat and energy led to the quantum being a unit of energy, and a photon is often thought to be a quantum. So the standard physical approach to that makes you think that a photon is something that exists like a mini sun all by itself.
Right.
But that's actually not true. And what Walt Thornhill brought up, and which you can find in other quantum physics books if you look hard enough, is that we've all seen a classic sine wave like in physics. For example, if you're watching an electroencephalogram or an electrocardiogram, you see a positive potential and a negative potential. If you look at alternating current, you got a positive half of the sine wave and a negative half of the sine wave. Mm-hmm. So what Walt Thornhill was pointing out, and others do, is that what we see as a photon is actually not an individual entity. Just like you have chakras that vibrate at different resonances, which correlate to the musical scale, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, but they're octaves above. The photons are octaves above the physical sound, for example. What Walt Thornhill was saying, and what others say, is that if you actually could see the waves, such as the quantum waves, that every time the wave reaches its peak energy potential, it shines, and that makes the light that we see as a photon. So when we're looking at the light out there, we're actually seeing the energy being emitted from the waves that are in the wave dimension, but it manifests as light in the vibrational spectrum that we're in. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah, it's interesting how one of the things that Walter Russell talks about, as I'm sure you know, in The Secret of Light and other books too, the Divine Iliad's a great one. The idea of rhythmic balanced interchange, and that everything in the universe exists in a state of perfect balance. And this to me goes back to the law of one that not only is in the raw material, but in Jesus's teachings. It harkens back to the golden rule of do unto others.
Yes.
Because Russell would say, to whatever extent you attempt to violate divine law, the laws of the universe, the law must violate you in equal measure, because the universe can't be imbalanced. And I love that as such a clear picture of divine law. It's so simple. It really is the law of one. Do no harm, love others as you love yourself, and you can't violate the law. And if that's true, that everything has a perfect rhythmic balanced interchange of the polarities, like you said, on the sine wave, positive, negative.
Yeah.
Then maybe light being the combination of electro and magnetism.
Yeah.
It's like it's able to be visible, even though it has no mass, because the positive, negative charges are always balancing perfectly.
Yeah.
Is that kind of the way you understand it?
Well, it's one of those things where, depending on your mindset and what philosophical camp or scientific viewpoint you take, it can take on different things. The way I understood it is that the energy, think of the cycle of yin and yang, okay? Mm-hmm. So in the morning, at night, there's no light. So the sun's in the yin phase, and as we see it. And then as the sun comes up, that's baby yang. When the sun reaches peak illumination, call it high noon, that's big yang. And then it begins to wane again. And then little yin comes on as the sun goes down, we'll call midnight big yin. So the way I perceived it from my studies of it is that when the photon reaches the top of the cycle, the energy is so strong that it glows and makes everything vibrate. And the neat thing about that explanation, though, is that because you can't separate a wave from the ocean. Mm-hmm. So think of that metaphor. Think of the ocean as God consciousness. Thinking of the waves as God dreaming, or the characters within the dream thinking, because Steiner says thoughts are spirit itself. Spirit is the flow of energy and information. So everything is the manifestations of spirit. Matter is simply spirit moving slowly enough that you can interact with it. So what's really quite for me, a deep realization is that if photons are actually the peaks of wave energies and waves are the flow of spirit, the way I demonstrate this to my students is I take out a sheet, like a bed sheet, and I lay it on the ground. And then I pull the sheet up, like they make little wiener dogs out of balloons sometimes. Like they tie them in, it's only one balloon, but they make a whole dog out of it, right? They just take the same balloon, give it legs, give it a body, give it a head, give it legs, but it's all one balloon. So I take the sheet and I pull it up and I make a little bundle of sheet and I say, okay, that's me. And then I make another bundle of sheet and I say, that's you. Look, it looks like we're two different people having a conversation. But now pull on the sheet and both of us disappear and become the one.
Yeah.
We become the divine ocean. So what I'm pointing to with this description is that when we're seeing light, we're actually seeing a wave in the fabric of God consciousness or in the divine ocean, but it allows us to have the necessary individuality by which love can create relationship, without which there can be no conscious growth. In other words, individuality is absolutely essential for unity, because without individuality, unity has no way to be aware of itself, because that which is unconditional cannot have self-consciousness. So it creates the illusion of separation, and love is the coming together of the individual entities in order to realize that they're actually the same sheet or wave in the metaphor. So what I loved about that description of light is that it is a great reminder to remember that we're kind of like foam on beer, like everything. The universe is like the foam on the beer, right? But it's all beer. And like I'm looking at you right now, you're in Austin, I'm in San Diego, and it looks like we're a long ways away. And let's call us both points of light. So technically, if I could grab the wave and pull on it, I would be pulling on you from me, and you're pulling on me from you. And when we come together, like Jesus said, whenever two or more get together in my name, I will be there. It's like he was saying, whenever two or more get together in love, there's a chance that they can realize the unity of themselves as one. Mm-hmm. And so I loved it because the kind of Einsteinian description of light really is more like the perception of the ego as something completely separate from everybody else. And that leads to materialism. But when you realize that the photon is actually the peak energy of a wave, which, is moving so fast, that's why this little sun's shining all the time, right? These waves are not like surf waves. They're, billions of times a second. So I only brought the paradox up because it lends itself to reminding ourselves that life itself is not only a miracle, it's a mystery.
Yeah. Which the Law of One says.
Yeah.
The quote is, everything begins and ends in mystery, Ross says. Love that quote. It's so true. Like that's where, again, the philosophy, the headiness, the being too much in the relative plane, you miss the magic. You miss the mysteries of the fact that, like we can have scientific systems that help us understand things and interact with the universe in positive ways, but none of it can actually be a true conceptual understanding of something. You can't understand God. You can experience God, and understanding can help you experience God. But it's what you said. It's that the whole purpose of the universe, as the Law of One says, is for the one infinite creator to know itself.
Exactly.
And it's already doing that at every moment. And what I really appreciate about the Law of One is it says both positive and negative polarities are equally valuable to the creator.
Yes.
Which is why it doesn't blink an eye at light or dark. It doesn't say positive, good, negative, bad. It actually harkens back to Plotinus and Aquinas and some of these other philosophers again, of this concept called privation theory, that evil or the negative polarity is just the deprivation of something, the deprivation of good or reality.
Or love.
Not a second substance, right, with its own ontological existence apart from God's power. And so Ra, likewise, they actually call the negative polarity the path of that which is not, meaning it's not fundamentally real or based on what is real. It's the inversion of what is real. And yet it's equally necessary to experience what is real. And for some reason, Paul, I find that concept, both for like religious, Christians and Muslims alike, and whether you want to call it New Age, spiritual people, whatever, people from every camp seem to have struggles with understanding this concept that the universe exists so that source can know itself. And they sort of presuppose that means that the source has some kind of limitation, like, oh, why does it have to know itself? And there's a paradox, right? It's like, no, we're not saying it has to know itself like it had a lack and needed to fulfill the lack, and so it created the universe. It's not like that. It's more just the emanation of like God is knowing itself, so it can't not know itself, right? Is that kind of the way you see it?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of ways to see it. There's a few things. There's a few things I want to say there. First of all, by definition, God is that for which there is no other.
Mm-hmm.
So there's nothing for God to know but itself.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had the experience in very deep shamanic journeys of union with God, and the aloneness, the intensity of the aloneness left me crying for hours. And I really realized why God dreams itself into existence and creates all the characters as unique expressions of the divine, because then God gets to experience love, and individuality turns out to be the necessary illusion to help alleviate God of its own pain of being alone. And so, you have to take these things allegorically, because you can't really be objective about these things. But I just use my own knowledge and rational capacity to try to put words to what I experience. But one of the passages in the Bible that the Christians hate and often do not mention is Isaiah 45:7. You remember that one?
Uh-huh.
And they hate it so much. About 25 years ago, they started changing it in the King James Bible. So it does not any longer say, I create the light and the dark, good and evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. They completely rewrote it, so it doesn't say that. Some versions say, I make peace and create evil. And so that goes to another problem that many Christians say the Bible is the inspired word of God and it's never been changed, which is absolute horseshit. But
we could talk about that.
Yeah, that'd be a long conversation. But the other thing that I think is important to understanding the light and the dark is that you cannot have consciousness without duality. You cannot be conscious of Aaron as a male without the concept of a female. You can't know what light is without dark. You can't know what good is without evil, and on it goes. So what I'm saying is, in order for God to know itself, it has to have these polarities.
Mm-hmm.
And so evil is really, in my estimation, there's many ways I can describe evil, but it's the absence of love.
Yeah.
Because when there's no love, there's no sense of connection to the other. And therefore, it doesn't matter what you do to the other. And the problem with evil is that it and even Ra talks about this, it isolates itself and it's got nowhere to go. You can only go so far. So I think Ra says, isn't the sixth density that negative polarity carriers have to turn in order to evolve. They
Yeah.
have to change polarity. And is it the sixth? I think it was the fifth or the sixth. I can't remember.
Yeah, it's early sixth density. They find themselves at an impasse, essentially. That
Yes.
the path of illusion, the negative polarity, can't progress any farther than that. And I think it's interesting, Paul, the way that the law of one material explains how evil, or the negative polarity, came into existence was kind of this combination of free will, which I believe is the first distortion
Yes.
of the law of one, and then the veil of forgetting. It's so cool to me the way Ra explains this, where I think Dawn asks Ra, like, was there ever a time in the universe before the negative polarity? And they say, oh, absolutely, yes. There was a very long time before the negative polarity. It wasn't until one specific logos, a star probably, had the idea of what would happen if we veiled incoming souls in third density from their memory. So they go in with a completely blank slate. What would happen?
Yeah.
Because up to that point, apparently third density, and this really serves our larger point of like there has to be contrast for self-knowledge and growth to take place. And they said in the third density, this was the problem, is that souls were caught in this state of non-evolution, because they said it's kind of like children in school. I love this analogy. They say third density was like a grade in school where the children are not rewarded for doing their homework and they're not punished for failing their tests. It's just like, yeah, just do homework or don't do it, like whatever.
Which will just
there's
halt
no
evolution.
impetus. What's that?
It halts evolution.
Yeah, there's got to be an impetus.
Yeah.
And so they said that this logos had the idea of maybe we can speed up the evolutionary cycle of third density beings if we veil them from their conscious memory of their soul when they go into a third density incarnation. And they said, boom, the result was phenomenal and was exactly what the logos was looking for, in that the combination of having free will plus a veil of forgetting now made it possible to act out of alignment with the law of one. Or the way I like to define sin or evil is like a movement of the will away from love or away from good. And so that up to that point, without the veil, it wasn't even possible for a being to have a movement of their will away from love, because there was only the awareness of oneness. So it's like, well, when you know what's actually true, why would you ever move away from what's true? It wasn't possible until the veil was created. And then they said, oh, this is a huge success. Let's replicate this across all third density planets in the universe.
Yeah.
And now third density became this like wild card density where it's extremely short, extremely intense, because you got to have a balance of both polarities. And it kind of like, it's sort of meant to chew you up and spit you out until you get your bearings under you as a soul, meaning, oh, I've got to like make use of this life. Like when I go to a third density life, it's quick, it's short, and there's a lot of hazards available. I got to be about my purpose and my mission if I want to really graduate from this realm.
Yeah. In my explorations, because typically what I do is I take deep questions to my soul, and only God can give a soul. So the soul is God within. It's the consciousness within, which is why mystics and yogis say Yogananda said God is closer than your breath. But when I asked my soul, why is evil allowed? My soul said, God wants to be loved authentically. And the analogy that I got is, could you really fall in love with a blow-up doll? No, because it's not a being, it's an object. Yeah. And if you were forced to love God or had no choice, would it really be love? No, it wouldn't.
No.
So what my soul said is that evil is simply the choice to not love God, without which we cannot have free will. We have to have the choice to love or not love, or free will cannot be given. And so to me, that's quite a good rational explanation of why there has to be something that's antagonistic to love, or we don't have the choice to love. And if any of us, which are really God in drag, couldn't choose to love God, then God would be getting fake love, and that would mean that we have a stupid God, and that wouldn't work.
Or a very evil God who then will torture you if you don't choose love. But he wants it to be a free choice, but if you don't, he's going to torture you. So there goes free will, out of the equation.
Well,
I had to grapple with this idea my whole life as a Christian kid. Of like,
yeah,
I know that God's love, I agree, but I can't factor in how this eternal conscious torment idea doesn't annihilate free will from the equation. Because even the idea that you can reject God, which is a common thing you'll hear from Christians of, hey, God honors free will. He can't force people to love him. And I say, of course, I agree. But then they say that if you're not able to love God, that means you're rejecting God. And therefore you must go to hell. And it's like, wait, how do you reject God? Like the source of all love and life and peace and happiness and joy? Like you think somebody could really meet God, know God as God is, and then also say, screw you, I choose hell. It's just the wildest idea to me.
Yeah, well, that's the problem with not only Christianity, but all religions. I've studied them all, and they're full of ridiculous ideas. And it's amazing to me how many people buy into all this stuff, which is why I have so much empathy for how lost human beings get and why I devoted my life to doing what I do. But back to the concept of an evil God. We know for sure God's not evil, because if God was evil, there wouldn't even be love. We would not have any experience of love. It wouldn't even exist. Just like if God was all dark, there would be no light.
You could say like love would allow evil, but evil would never allow love.
Right, exactly. Especially unconditional love, because it never says no, or it would be a conditional love. God is, what my experience of God is 100% open to any experience, because any possible experience helps God become more aware of itself and what it is. And, these are like things that you have to sit and meditate on. You can't just use logic and rationality to try to figure these things out, because God's as much of a poet as a mathematician or a scientist. The problem is if you take any one approach, like a lot of people say everything in the universe is mathematical, or everything in the universe is based on laws. Well, those are overly rational approaches, but God is as much. Yeah, God's a musician, God's a poet, God's an artist, God's a playwright. And I think to really understand God, you have to explore God through a wide variety of left brain and right brain potentials, or you can get caught in a dogma and torture other people with your ideology.
Nobody does that.
No.
On our planet.
No. And we have to remove the word crusades out of the dictionary, don't we?
Yeah.
Because
it's what I love about the law of one is the way that it's able to, again, take you out of the purely intellectual, philosophical, abstract into the living embodiment of these ideas through the different teaching modalities like spiritual balancing, like catalyst integration, like the disciplines of the personality. We talked about heart chakra being the gateway, or the great stepping stone, Ra calls it, from the lower three energy centers to the upper three. And they say when your heart chakra is activated, it immediately brings into availability the throat and the third eye and crown as well to begin doing spiritual work in them.
Yeah.
So it really is the bridge between the personal and the universal. And I love the disciplines of the personality for that reason, because Ra kind of boils down their entire spiritual system that they're delivering and how to progress through it to these three disciplines. And I think when we look at love thyself or know thyself, love or accept thyself as kind of the feminine principle of the personality, that would for sure be heart chakra, accept thyself. Know thyself, the masculine polarity of those disciplines, would be the throat, because that's authenticity, being truthful to yourself, being honest with yourself. That's a big component of what it means to know thyself. And then third eye becomes become the creator. And the big point is the third step is not possible until the first two have been accomplished.
Yeah.
So this idea that the heart brings into availability all the energy centers is true, but there's no skipping an energy center, to work. Like I can't skip the throat to start working on the third eye because the third eye depends on the energy I'm getting from the throat and from the heart and in the sequence, right? And when I read that in the Law of One like a decade ago, it made all the sense in the world to me because I spent a lot of time just trying to activate my third eye, but comparatively almost no time trying to forgive people and be of service, love myself, be honest and authentic. Those things to me were like, I'll get to that later. Those are superlative. I want to really activate the psychic abilities.
Mm-hmm.
But Steiner's work especially also helped me with the Law of One material understand like, no, you've got to absolutely build the foundations before you can even think about trying to get up into the third eye and activating your psychic abilities.
Yeah. One thing I've learned myself, because through my own evolution, all my voyances came on. I think we all have a natural one that my experience of work, I've got over 63,000 students. I've been teaching for 41 years and practicing. So teaching and practicing. So I've had a lot of time to interact with a lot of people, study and explore a lot of things. But the thing that I've found just observing my own life is, and I see this to be true in others, is that the more capacity we cultivate to love ourselves, love each other, and love life, the more we are open to seeing the truth of God. And so the voyances go beyond the senses. They go into the subtle realms, which is beyond our sensory realm. So people that are, for example, locked in the first three chakras are very much entangled in their sensory reality.
Yeah.
But once you start having more and more love to share and more love for yourself and more love for life itself, it's as though spirit unveils more and more to you. And I think, in summary, my experience is that the more capacity we have for love, the more God unveils the mysteries to us. I think that's because people, like you said, people ask me all the time, how do I turn on my clairvoyance, or how do I do this, or how do I levitate, or they want CDs or spiritual powers, but they don't really want to do the work of evolution, which is dangerous. If people could get CDs without learning to love, we'd have the same conundrum we've got with AI coming on. A bunch of unevolved people using advanced technology. And I just had a great podcast with Federico Fagin. And, one of the things that we talked about is the fact that, the problem we have right now, and others have talked about this, is that our technological abilities have moved about 15 steps beyond our moral capacity, which is a formula for disaster. If we put as much effort into growing spiritually as we have into building atomic bombs and biochemical weapons, we'd be very enlightened people.
Or even half as much.
Yeah, even half as much. One of the questions I wanted to ask you, though, is how in the world did you go from this Christian upbringing to getting involved in Raw? Because that's quite a step out of the Christian camp. You're quite a sinner for that kind of stuff.
And they have. Well, it all began when I got my first church job at 23. I've told this story a lot, but I'm sure you've never heard it, so I'll tell you. I was 23. I just got my first full-time worship pastoring role at a church in San Jose, where I was born and raised. Graduated from ORU with a double bachelor's in music and theology, and I was ready to start my ministry career, following my dad's footsteps and all of that. And my dad's church, our church growing up, was called Springs of Life Fellowship in the Bay Area in the 90s. We were not a very religious, legalistic church. My dad loved preaching on the Holy Spirit, the love of Jesus, the goodness of God. I never heard him teach a sermon about hell or any of these kind of like fire, brimstone topics. So we kind of used religion as a dirty word of like, hey, come on, that's religious, man. Don't give into that. So I grew up around that kind of culture, even as a Christian, of like, religion's kind of not a good thing. but I didn't have to really face the true dogmatic beliefs of my religion because we believed all the same things at the end of the day. Like we believed the Bible was inerrant. We believed Jesus is coming back, hell, all that. We just didn't talk about it because these are uncomfortable fallacies to acknowledge, right?
Not good for membership.
Very good for membership, yes.
No, I'm saying if you start talking about all that stuff, it's not good for membership.
Oh, and vice versa. Yeah. If you talk about it, membership goes down.
Yeah. Everyone gets scared.
Yeah. Numbers go up.
Keep it happy.
I mean, and we did. And a lot of churches do that for good reason.
Yeah.
And then they get poo-pooed on by the legalistic churches that are like, you're not teaching the true word, you know?
Yeah.
So I worked at a church that was teaching the true word in that way. Because the very first Sunday, I had just gotten married, by the way, to my Christian wife at the time. I was 23, she was 20. And we're sitting in the front row after just leading worship. And this woman goes on stage to give an offering testimony. And this man is standing behind her, like all stoically. And I, as a Christian who knows the Bible like the back of my hand, I immediately thought to myself, oh, please, God, don't let this be what I think it is. Because there's a verse from Paul in 1 Corinthians 14, 34 through 36, I think, where he says basically like, it's a shame for a woman to even speak in church. If a woman has to speak in church, a man has to stand behind her as her covering because the woman sinned first and then the man. So the woman's more guilty than the man. And it's this very misogynistic idea that like,
give me a minute. I need to go get my barf bowl.
I know, right?
That kind of shit just drives me absolutely fucking crazy.
Well, it drove me crazy enough to leave Christianity, Paul, because
good.
I was so turned off by this. I'm like, I've never seen people take this scripture literally. I thought we all kind of silently agreed, like, yeah, we don't believe that. But here's a church that clearly does, because this woman is speaking with her husband standing behind her as if he's offering some kind of spiritual sanctimony to her. And it was just
giving her permission.
Yeah. And of course, I'm newly married. So my then wife was like, hey, what the heck is this? Like, these people believe this bullshit? And I'm like, I think they do. And so I had a big crisis of faith at that time because I'd never been confronted with bigotry like that in church until that moment. And so I'm like, okay, well, I say I believe this book is inerrant, but there's no way I can square that kind of behavior with God, the God that I know and experience, or the God I see revealed in Jesus.
Yeah.
So I did what every good Christian tries to do, which is to apologetics away the contradiction.
The fact that they have apologists is a problem itself.
I know. I say that all the time, man. It's like the fact that you need a whole modality just to defend your faith. Like,
yeah.
I don't think that exists in any other religion, as far as I know.
Well, the rabbis are pretty good at it too.
Yeah, a little bit in Judaism, probably a little bit in Islam as well, but it's nothing like Christianity, man. And so I tried to harmonize Paul with Paul, this is what apologetics is. If you have a contradiction here, you go digging around through, the Bible, and you try to find another verse that can dismiss it. You say, well, but Paul also said here that women can prophesy. So see, he's not really a misogynist.
Oh my God. Yeah.
I know it's funny, but it's what they do, man.
I know all about it. My mother was a Christian before she became a yogi. Okay. And I'll tell you what, when my mother became a yogi, it was like God descended in our house and the violence went way down. And me as a kid in a Christian school, I thought, am I being punished? Because how come I can ask questions about the severe inconsistencies, forgive me for my regular podcast listeners for sharing this, but I would hear them talking about how Jesus is the Son of God and God is love and Jesus is God's Son and Jesus loves everybody. But then I would be hearing them say, well, if you don't take Christianity as your faith, you're going to burn in hell. And I said, well, what happened to Jesus loves everybody?
Yeah. And then the opposite of love.
And then I got confused as an 8-year-old or a 7-year-old or whatever little kid sitting in church singing Onward Christian Soldiers Marching Off to War with the cross of Jesus going on before. I'm like, wait a minute. Jesus loves everybody, but now he's marching off to slaughter them all. I mean, and so here I am.
During Nam or something?
Let's see. I was born in 1961, so it would have been the first first 12 years of my life. My mother she was a Christian Scientist, then she became a yogi when I was 12.
Oh, nice. I like Christian Science.
Yeah,
that's some good stuff.
it's Mary Baker Eddy. It's good, except some of the ideas are a little flawed. I won't tell you stories that I could tell you, but the point is that then I would try to ask people in church, and I couldn't get any answers. I couldn't get any answers from adults, and I used to walk around and think, I'm actually scared that adults can't see this. Why does nobody want to answer these questions? So I developed a sort of a resent for the inconsistencies or the decoherence of all this. It left me feeling scared of God. It left me feeling very nervous, and it left me feeling very afraid of adults, because I thought, are they like, these people drive cars with kids in the back of them, and they're that stupid. I mean, how is that safe for us kids? And so it really disturbed me, but I'll share something with you just from my own experience. And I've shared it on the podcast before, but I think it's worthy of sharing because it's in context with our dialogue here. I'll never forget, Aaron, the first day I went to a Self-Realization Fellowship Temple meeting. It's so alive in me to this very moment because it had a healing effect on me that was profound. We walked into the temple, and then there's the monk that's giving the sermon, but he initiates the prayer to open the ceremony. And this is what he said. Heavenly Father, Jesus Christ, Paramahansa Yogananda, Sri Yukteswar, Lahiri Mahashai, Babaji, Krishna, saints and sages of all religions, we humbly bow to you all. When I heard those words, a total shift happened in me, and I felt safe for the first time in my entire life. I knew I was with people that I could trust. I knew I was with people that were loving, and the monks always answered my questions. And I'm a guy that can ask a lot of pivoting, deep questions that people don't like. I've always been that way since I was a child. And I would cross-examine these monks left, right, and center, and they just loved it. They gave me, I've never had a monk give me an answer that made me feel like they were just citing a Bible passage or saying something to kind of subvert it. And I also love the monks because they would say, I don't know, Paul. That's a very good question. If I can get the answer to that, I'll share it with you. But that's something worth meditating on. And for, some of these monks are like 35, 40 years of experience as a monk. And for them to say that to me as a young man was really impressive to me. It really opened my heart to God.
Yeah.
Prior to that, the idea of God scared the hell out of me, and the idea of dying to that God was even worse. Hi, guys. What do you reach for when you want a little pickup, when you want a little happy making? There's lots of things that I used to love. For example, I used to love my espresso in the afternoon, but that caused me lots of problems. So I had to retool that one. There's a lot of things that have sugar in them, but my body hates that. If you want to be healthy and you want to be clean, there's not much you can do. But Organifi's got some new happy drops that, believe me, are really good. And they're simple. They've got passion flower, go-to cola, organic saffron, and ginger root extract. And these things are awesome. You put a couple in your mouth. I like to suck them and let them melt down slow. And in a few seconds, you are feeling happy again with a little mood elevation and a little energy lift too. I absolutely love these things. My kids love them. And the thing I love about them is they make me feel good without doing anything but good for me. So if you want to get some happy drops, go ahead and try these. You're going to be amazed. I absolutely love these things, and my kids love them too. And I know you're going to love them. And you don't have to feel guilty about it because there's nothing in there that's bad for you at all. Far better than an addictive anything, and great for you. Try Organifi's Happy Drops.
To try Organifi's new Happy Drops and to get 20% off your order, go to Organifi.com/Chek20 and use the promo code Chek20 at checkout. That's Organifi.com/Chek20. Organifi.com/CHEK20. And the promo code is CHEK20 for a 20% discount.
So anyhow, how did you come across the raw teachings, and where did that come into your life? Because that's very interesting.
Yeah. Well, to your last point, that's also a realization I had at 23. It was like, it started around 18. I started reading my Bible differently and being like, wait a minute, some of this stuff is not adding up. And some of these verses talk about God wants sacrifices and spew the blood of the goat's neck all over the altar and spray the blood everywhere. And that's a sin offering. And then your sins are forgiven. And then I read later in the prophets, they're like God's angrily condemning animal sacrifice, calling it an abomination that God never wanted or commanded, saying, I've only ever asked you for obedience and mercy and compassion and righteousness. And I'm like, I don't know how to square these Bible passages. So I slowly started questioning certain things. But one of the things that woke me up to the fact that I was in a cult was that everyone seemed to always have the answers and have everything figured out. And like, I was pretty aware that I knew the Bible a lot better than anyone else I knew as my age, like in youth group and stuff. I knew the Bible a lot better than most adults. I studied the Bible day and night, read the Bible cover to cover nonstop. And I have all these questions, and I know the Bible better than you do. And when I ask you about it, you've got all these answers. And then if I ask certain questions, something's not adding up here.
You're a smart kid, Aaron.
When I ask certain questions, they get really angry.
Of course, yes, I experienced that too. Lots of times, even to this day.
Why are you getting so angry?
Yeah.
If what you believe is so true and so clear, and anyone who reads the Bible would know this, why do you get so angry when I ask about this? So I started to wake up to those things and just realize, oh gosh, I'm in a cult. And really, again, what it was realizing that Christianity that I knew was actually, when I really looked at the red letters of Jesus and cross-compared them to what's taught in Christianity, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is entirely the religion of Paul. Christianity doesn't even teach hardly anything Jesus taught. They in fact say, hey, look, his life and ministry wasn't all that important, to be honest. It was all about his virgin birth and his death and resurrection. That's all you need to know about Jesus to go to heaven when you die. But when I read Jesus, that's not what he says. He never says, confess me as Lord. He never says, believe in my death and resurrection. I mean, for crying out loud, Paul, even after Jesus rises from the dead, he doesn't tell people they have to believe in his death and resurrection.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I'm not seeing this Jesus y'all are seeing.
Yeah.
And when I read the red letters, he's like, hey, if you don't love your neighbor as yourself, I don't know who you are, man. Because when I was hungry, you didn't feed me. And so don't call me Lord, Lord, and not love your neighbor as yourself, or I don't know who you are. And never in my life have I ever heard a pastor preach that sermon of, hey, you can confess Jesus all you want, but if you're judging others, you're going to be judged. That's the way it goes. Or, there's 3 passages where Jesus is asked, good teacher, how do I enter eternal life? And all 3 passages, Jesus says, without hesitation, keep the commandments. Most notably, the first and greatest commandment, love God with all your heart, love your neighbor as yourself. When you do this, you fulfill the whole law.
Yeah.
And I prove to Christians all the time when I say, hey, you're in the religion of Paul, not Jesus. And they get really upset. I say, oh, no, don't worry. I can prove it to you right now. And they say, oh, prove it. And I say, okay, if somebody asked you, my friend, I'm a non-Christian. I'm tired of being a sinner. How do I enter eternal life according to Christianity? Would you ever say, keep the commandments? And they, without question, always respond, of course not. That's not how you get saved. Then how do you get saved? You got to confess Jesus and believe in his death. Okay, so you're saying you have to get saved by what Paul said in Romans 10:9, but yet the only answer Jesus ever gave when asked about this was keep the commandments. So why isn't Christianity teaching what Jesus taught if it's the religion of Jesus? And you see the light bulbs go on. And so I started seeing this stuff when I started looking through Paul's writings. I'm like, this guy is an enemy cursing, braggadocious narcissist who never stops talking about himself. He violates everything Jesus taught about doing good works. He's like, no, you don't need to do good works. That's filthy rags. It's just faith alone. And I'm comparing Jesus and Paul, and it's like, yo, when I compare Paul to the gold standard of Jesus, I find him to be sorely lacking. And so I realized I'm not a part of this religion anymore because I don't want to be a follower of Paul. Although bless Paul, he's a great guy, meant well, I'm sure, but he got some big things wrong and he never knew Jesus. And so I had to leave Christianity for Jesus. And that's what began my journey into texts like A Course in Miracles and the Law of One. Because now that I'm not dogmatically locked into, I can only know Jesus through this Bible, I was open to exploring other texts and conceptions of Jesus outside of the Bible. So ACIM was probably the first one. And very shortly after that, I came across the Law of One. And I think it was because somebody told me that the Law of One has some really interesting things to say about Jesus, which it does. And so that sparked my curiosity and I started digging through it. And when I first read it, Paul, I don't know if you had this experience, but my experience was this is like the most profound material I've ever come across. And I
was very impressed. Yeah.
About it.
I couldn't stop. It was like addicting. And I was really grateful when they started putting it out on audio because then I could refresh myself while, driving or lifting weights.
That's the way to do it.
The thing for me is like, I have a real truth compass in my heart. And when I was reading Raw, my truth compass was pointing due north,
Yeah.
And as David Wilcock says, many of the things that Raw spoke about were not scientifically validated at the time of those recordings, but have later since been scientifically validated. David Wilcock says, I don't know where this scale is. He said there's a system for rating channeled works. And that when they put Raw to this test, I think it was 98 or 99% authentic, which is pretty impressive.
Wow.
I've never been
able
to
feel like that.
Yeah, I've never been able to track down the rating scale or how they go through, because I think today with all these channeled works, we really need something to weigh this out, because with the disgust of Orthodox religion, there's so many, especially young people, looking for something to give them a sense of something to connect to, God.
Yeah.
And so I see people just diving head over heels into a lot of what I would call lower quality channeled works that don't really resonate at nearly a high level. They're kind of like a 240 on the Hawkins scale versus a 500,
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's one of the things I was going to get to with you later on, but that goes back. Now, we've talked about this. There's a couple things I wanted to share that I wrote down while you were talking. I don't know if you've ever seen or read this book, but it's freaking impressive, and I wish every Christian would read it. Have you ever seen Manly P. Hall's book, How to Understand and Interpret Your Bible?
No, but I love Manly P. Hall.
Well, Manly P. Hall's badass, straight up.
He was, man.
That's a powerful freaking dude. I've read a lot of his books, and another guy,
His name
Ronnie.
Was Manly, for crying out loud.
Yeah, and
like, what better name could you choose?
If you haven't ever listened to any Ronnie Pontiac's interviews on the new Thinking Aloud with Jeffrey Mishlove on YouTube, Ronnie Pontiac was Manly P. Hall's assistant, and I think he was in charge of Manly P. Hall's library for 7 years. And Ronnie Pontiac is kind of like a Manly P. Hall in the flesh. And he knows all the world religions inside out and backwards. And he was in a band. I can't remember which band, but he was in a famous band. He's a musician as well. But I read Manly P. Hall's book, I think it's either How to Understand Your Bible or Understand and Interpret Your Bible. But he makes it very clear you could never read the Bible unless you actually understood all the root languages. He shows you how there is so much in the Bible from many other traditions, whether it be Hebrew, Aramaic, etc., that there's no possible way you can have an accurate interpretation in English. Plus, the Bible's been translated from Aramaic to Greek and Greek to English. So and have you ever heard of the book Prayers of the Cosmos by Neil Donald Klotz?
Oh, yeah.
That's a beautiful book, man.
Beautiful book.
And he shows you in Aramaic, because he went to the oldest Bible, I think, probably anywhere that's got the Aramaic. And then he translates all the teachings of Jesus. And then he shows you, because Aramaic only has, I believe, 14 or 16 letters in their alphabet, which means there's a lot more meanings to each letter or word. Mm-hmm. And he shows you like the 4 possible ways you could have translated any of the statements, like the Beatitudes of Jesus or any of the things that Jesus said. And he shows you which one the Christian church chose. And it was clear as a bell. They chose the one that suited their own corporate purposes and not potentially the words of Jesus. So, and in that book, he gives you a CD with audio tracks of what Jesus said being said in Aramaic. And it's, even though I don't understand Aramaic, the soul understands every language. So it's just beautiful to listen to. And it's funny because I've turned some of my Christian acquaintances and friends on to Manly P. Hall's book, and they won't even read it. It's like, it amazes me how people don't want to know the truth. They just want to believe. And you've used, you've used the word faith many times. And I can't remember who it was, but I was listening to a very spiritually tapped in scientist. It could have been Fred Allen Wolf or someone like that. But they said something really important. Faith should begin where knowledge ends. In other words, don't just have blind faith. Do the work and study and really look into things yourself. And don't just have blind faith like a child has to have faith in their mommy and daddy because they have no knowledge or discernment of their own. So they have no choice but to have faith in mommy and daddy. Have faith that there's an answer and that there is hope, but do your best with the knowledge you have, or you're really copping out on the authentic work of your own spiritual development.
I completely agree. I think faith to me is trust, really.
Yeah, I agree.
When I'm going through a difficult catalyst, as Ra would call it, and I don't know what the outcome is going to be, I don't even know what I'm really supposed to be doing in the midst of this catalyst, and I just don't know. That's where faith comes in to me. It's, God, I don't know, but you know. I don't have the power to change this, but you do. And I know I'm speaking dualistically, but this is the way that I activate faith is by when I'm out of moves, I make sure to acknowledge that God, I don't need to have any moves because God is the all-doer. God is all-powerful, omniscient, omnipresent. And then you just can relax into that. And so faith to me is the relaxing into trust versus like, no, I believe, I really believe. Yeah. That's what Christianity has made faith into, is this intense mental assent to theological ideas. And to me, that's actually the opposite of faith. Faith should be a non-striving if it's real. Because if it's nothing else other than surrender to God, right? So how do you surrender with intensity of effort at the same time?
Yeah. Yeah. And this is why Lao Tzu's teachings are so beautiful, because it's more about doing less and being more centered and being more open to the deep truths of the Tao than trying to manufacture them and believe them, because the depth of God is just unfathomable. So to try to concretize God, this is exactly why Nietzsche said God is dead, because the Christian church had so concretized everything that there was no room for a mystery anymore, And so and that's how you turn a symbol into a sign. You give it a definite meaning. And so the transcendent function of the symbol dies. and really another discussion, but everything in existence is an icon. It's a symbol. It's a means of, like, I lift stones, and when I tell people, I talk to stones out there and they tell me how to, put them together, they look at me like I'm crazy, but I'm like, hey, if you just empty your mind and get to the point where you can listen, you'll realize that there is a spirit in the stones, and it knows a lot. And one thing that stones know is how they fit together, because I've been able to build things I could never have done with my rational mind. And I'm like, I look at it and go, I don't even know how I did that, but anyhow,
stone stacking.
What's that?
The stone stacking.
Yeah. And building things like water chargers and various structures. I just go out there and let my soul just guide me, and I call it unbound play. So it's training for my ego to not get attached to an outcome, because if stones fall over, who gives a shit?
That's so epic, man. I love it.
It takes a while for the ego to kind of drop its need for pushing an outcome all the time and grading itself. And so I developed a number of approaches for my patients called unbound play, which is any activity that you can engage out of the intention to be creative, but not to judge the outcome. I found that that was very healing for people, and that they really needed to stop constantly putting value judgments on themselves and other people, which is almost always based on some outcome they're trying to get or that they want. And it leads to a lot of polarity and a lot of separation and a lot of self-doubt and self-denial and guilt and shame. And so I found that if you can just introduce people to things like art without having any attachment to how pretty it is, or stacking stones, or playing a game just to play the game, but not to try to, you can try to win because it's a game, but you want to let go of the need to win, or you feel disappointed in yourself, or you feel inferior to somebody. Anybody that thinks they're good at games, I would love to invite them to see what happens when they play games with my 5-year-old girl and my 9-year-old boy, because get ready to get your ass kicked. These kids are really, so fat. Oh my God. Angie and Penny are masterful game players. I used to laugh anytime someone would come to the house and want to play games with Angie and Penny, because these girls are just wickedly smart. And my kids can hammer all of us. It's a joke.
Wow. What kind of games?
Any game, any card game, Monopoly board game. Give them 1 or 2 games to figure it out, and then get ready to just get your ass kicked. Many people,
Gen Alpha kids, man.
Many friends and people have come to visit us and stayed with us, and they're like, "Oh my God, these kids! How in the world did they just kill me in this game?" I'm like, "Get used to it."
That'll humble you.
My daughter's 5. She can have a whole spread of cards in front of her, and she can just, that one's a 10, and she'll flip it over. It's a 10. That one, I'm like, fuck, you're looking right through the cards, man. No wonder nobody can beat you.
Oh my gosh.
She just knows. She's a witch. It's crazy.
The Gen Alpha kids are built different, man. They really are.
Yeah, I don't know if that's the new generation. Mana's 9 and Zoe's 5, but it's wild, dude. It's like, you get ready for an ego leveling if you start playing games with my kids.
Wow. Well, I got a 6-month-old daughter, so maybe in a few years I'll pick up on some of that.
Oh yeah, you're going to. They're coming in to help. But how have you in yourself, what's your means of measuring a Ra versus a Seth versus a Abraham, Esther Hicks? Yeah. Like this, all of these Seth and Abraham, they've all got some great stuff to say. There's others. There's so many of them popping up lately. They're just coming out like mushrooms,
I know. Everybody's a channeler these days.
Yeah, and that's all fine and dandy, but there's just like the Hawkins scale. There's a level of authenticity, and a lot of people just fall in, and now they're just in another religion metaphorically. They're not really questioning. They're not thinking for themselves. So how do you do it internally? What's your way of determining what you give some credence to and what you question?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a really great question. I've never been asked before. And I don't really have an answer other than the one that you gave, which
Heart
is
compass.
just being really sensitized to your inner truth compass. And I think there's also degrees of channeling, obviously. It's not just like you're channeling or you're not. It doesn't really work like that.
Right.
So when I read the Law of One material, or when I read it initially, it was like, this is by far the most profound channeled material I've ever found before. There's just a different frequency to it this is one of the feedbacks that everybody gives about the Law of One that I've seen is the information in the Law of One. It's like I'm remembering it. Like part of me always knew it.
Yes.
And yet I didn't know it, but like it gives answers to so many questions, and it just helps everything lock into place about the nature of life, the universe, myself. The Law of One answers so many pieces of the puzzle that you just get this huge picture in front of you in your mind's eye of like, I really feel like I understand the nature of the universe and the soul and reincarnation now. Like these big topics.
It's very holistic. It's more holistic than anything I've ever studied. And
I would agree.
Yeah, it's the other thing that I find, and I'm curious how you feel about this, when you get channeled works of that caliber, and there are, as I said, other good channeled works. I've got loads of channeled works. Some of them are good, some of them aren't worth the paper they're printed on. But I always give everybody a fair shot. You know, I don't say, oh, I don't want to hear that because it's channeled. I always read it or look or listen and say, okay, well, I've got a truth compass in myself. I don't need to reject anything until I give it a chance. But the thing that really gives me, I've had many encounters with extraterrestrial beings, and they're not at all unusual for me. But when I went through the raw material, I must say that it took me to a level of appreciation for the fact that we're not alone, that there are much more evolved beings than us, that we are on an evolutionary trajectory. And it made the universe feel like a safer place to me, realizing that there were beings of very, very high intelligence. And I've spoken to many of them and asked, like, are you aware of what's going on Earth? They all say yes. And I said, well, why are you letting this happen? Because the Earth is going to get destroyed beyond repair almost any day now. And they say very much what the Law of One says. Well, we can only intervene so much because you have to work through your own problems or you're not going to grow. But then they give me examples of ways they have intervened, such as I've been told, and I know this is true, that they've deactivated nuclear weapons many times. Yep. They said your whole planet your whole race would have been dead long ago if we had not intervened, because there's been many times that nuclear missiles were set to launch and we deactivated them, and it would have been the end of the world. So they seem to have a code of when they can intervene and when they can't. But I think doesn't Ra talk about nuclear weapons at some point in the series?
Yes, they definitely do. They talk about Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Yeah.
That one's kind of a scarier passage in the sense of like the metaphysical consequences of things like atom bombs and nukes.
Yeah.
Because they said something like, it's been a while since I've read it, but the souls in Japan and Hiroshima and Nagasaki who died in the nuclear blast, something about nuclear energy is it has very deleterious effects on the actual energy body. And so it not only disintegrates the physical, but the energetic body, the chakras and all that.
Yeah.
And it takes apparently not a short period of time and healing in the astral plane to reassemble the mind, body, spirit complex. And they said eventually all the souls are reassembled. But if we didn't do it, basically if these higher beings didn't take these souls and kind of put the pieces back together, they wouldn't be able to do it themselves or something to that extent.
They probably wouldn't be able to, they wouldn't be able to evolve. They'd be stuck in limbo.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, that's some pretty scary consequences to the idea of nuclear warfare. That's completely outside the physical consequences of it, right?
Yeah, one thing I read either in the Law of One or came to me through communication with extraterrestrial beings myself was that what human beings haven't realized yet is that nuclear weapons are so powerful that the impact crosses dimensions.
Yes, I've heard that as well.
And that when we release a nuclear weapon like we did in Japan, that it actually creates shock waves. And they said, imagine a tidal wave, the impact of a tidal wave, but the energy release is so strong, it can actually affect our civilizations and our ways of living because the shock wave penetrates right through multiple dimensions. And they basically said, you don't realize it, but you're being destructive to other worlds, literally. And we can't allow that to happen.
Yeah, thank God.
Hello, my fellow spiritual warriors and world workers. I hope you're enjoying this podcast as much as I am. It is no secret that today we are not only bombarded with so-called health and fitness information from every angle, be it social media, TV, podcasts, etc., but clearly it's not working. Many studies conducted worldwide show that children, teens, adults, and the elderly are the most unhealthy, overweight, and the sickest they've ever been. But it does not have to be that way for you. When I wrote my book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy, I researched the number of diet books available at that time, and there were over 5,000 of them, each claiming to have the right diet for anyone and everyone. But the reason I wrote How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy was because these books all overlook the fact that no two people are the same, and therefore no two people are likely to get good results on the same diet. That's simply fact. Another reason the myriad of diet approaches available today fail so often is that they don't look at the underlying causes that lead to body health and mental emotional challenges. They treat the human being as though it were a machine, and all you need to do is add this liquid or that supplement, and presto, the machine runs again. These issues are more important than ever considering the physiological, mental, emotional, environmental stress and toxicity in the world today. Today, it is critical to learn the essentials of how to eat, hydrate, breathe, cultivate life force energy, and use your mind to create the life you've always wanted to live. This is exactly what you will learn in our upcoming Holistic Lifestyle Coach Level 1 training program, live with my wife and master instructor, Angie Chek. This workshop is designed for anyone that genuinely wants to be healthy and is ideal for fitness enthusiasts, athletes, and parents. It's also a great chance to explore and see if you want to move into our Holistic Lifestyle Coach Level 2, which is our professional level training, and pursue a career as a holistic lifestyle coach today when it is so desperately needed. Not only will you be taught by Angie Chek, one of the most knowledgeable experts in holistic health in the world, I will make guest appearances and answer questions. HLC1 is a rare opportunity to take HLC1 training live at our beautiful Rainbow home, atop of a mountain in Fallbrook, California, with beautiful views, and you get to enjoy my amazing stone-charged water and work out in my beautiful gym. So if you want to learn from a true master in person and get your most important questions answered, don't miss this special opportunity. If you want to meet other holistically minded people and grow your conscious community, there's no better place than our live workshops. In this important, practical 3-day training program, you will learn how to apply the 1, 2, 3, 4 approach to developing long-term body-mind changes and how to apply the 5 essential program design factors. Learn to use your Chek nutrition and lifestyle questionnaires for assessing physiological load and making essential diet and lifestyle changes. Understand the relationship between the 6 Chek foundation principles and body-mind stress. Learn how to apply the 6 Chek foundation principles to balance your body systems so you can exemplify well-being. Identify common roadblocks to success with diet and lifestyle modifications and gain simple solutions. Discover how to use the less is more principle of exercise prescription. To learn more and register, go to chekinstitute.com/core. That's chekinstitute.com/core. I'm sure this will be a life-changing workshop for anybody that attends, and I look forward to seeing you all here at our beautiful home in Fallbrook, California. Enjoy.
HLC1 with Angie Chek will be held on May 30th to June 1st, 2025. To learn more and to register, go to chekinstitute.com/core. That's CHEK institute.com/CORE. Don't miss this only opportunity to take HLC1 live and in person with Angie this year.
Well, Aaron, Jesus, what an amazing conversation. I slipped the word Jesus in there, but
very fitting, actually.
Yeah, and I think where I'd like to kind of round out the podcast to bring it to a close is what you've shared with me to be your favorite topic. Can you, for the listeners that may not be familiar with Ra or haven't read the Law of One by Ra series, which is available on Amazon or any bookstore. It's LL Research is their website, right? llresearch.org, is it?
Yeah, that's their main website. And you can read the Law of One on lawofone.info is the website.
Okay. And they do have, I think, book 1 and 2 now on audio as well.
Yeah, the whole thing.
Oh, last time I was there, it was 1 and 2, and I went through those. I'm glad to know I'll get the other ones and just review them, because like we talked about earlier, the density of that material and the volume, it's good to redust the bookshelves now and then.
Dude, I've listened to the Law of One through 12 times.
Wow, yeah.
And every time I listen to it, it feels like I've never listened to it.
Yeah, it is very good. And the truth is always attractive to a soul that really wants the truth. And I think that's one of the ways you can tell the authenticity is that it is something that you don't ever get tired of feeding on, so to speak. It always fills my soul up. And it's like so nice to hear from beings of that high of consciousness. You can just feel it's a good place. It's a good well to drink from, as I would say. So go ahead and give us sort of the principles of Ra's teaching so that anybody listening can say, okay, well, if I go read the Law of One, this is what Ra's really all about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, we touched on the disciplines. I would say it probably all starts with that, to understand Ra's core thesis of here's how you spiritually evolve, or polarize, as they would put it. So for me, the 3 disciplines: know thyself, accept thyself, and then you can become the creator, co-creator of your reality. Until then, you're still living on autopilot, default mode, ego consciousness, and all of that. So they kind of they do have an interesting passage on ego, and Ra says we don't really like to work with that concept because it's so muddied in your language, which you say as well, and I agree. But they say that we're trying again to polarize our level of consciousness at least enough to where we're 51% or greater heart chakra activated. And so the idea is like, it goes back to the densities model of the densities are very much like grades in school, where if you're going from 3rd to 4th grade, there's certain preliminary things you have to be able to prove as a student that you grasp to be eligible for 4th grade.
Yes.
So you've got to know the basics of where 4th grade starts before you go to 4th grade. And Ra says it works exactly the same way for the soul's evolution in the universe, in that we're in 3rd trying to get to 4th. 4th is the density of love and understanding. So you've got to prove you're at least 51% more towards love and understanding before you're even eligible to go to that density. So you got to learn the lessons of the following density while you're in the previous one. Mm-hmm. And the same works, by the way, for the 4th and beyond. So 4th density beings are polarizing towards 5th density. And so they need to learn the lessons of wisdom, and especially like how to balance your service with equal amount of wisdom with love. Because if it's just all heart, but not enough wisdom, you might end up serving in the not most effective way, or maybe even doing harm sometimes by, you want to help somebody so bad, you're kind of infringing on their process a bit.
Yeah.
So I love the nuance Ra offers there, but they say the way to polarize from 3rd to 4th density are things like forgiveness is something they stress a lot, which is all through, the core teachings of Jesus were all about forgiveness. Luke 6:37, for example, Jesus says, and very much hearkening to the Law of One, right? Jesus says, judge, and you're going to be judged. Condemn, and you're going to be condemned. Forgive, and you'll be forgiven. For the measure you give will be the measure you get back. And that's a age-old classic spiritual principle that every culture and religion touches on, of this kind of law of reciprocity. Yes, it is really the golden rule. So disciplines begin with know thyself, love thyself, and then you step into third eye consciousness of being able to be the creator of your reality. But you don't even have to get that far technically to graduate from third to fourth density, meaning your soul will have the luxury, let's say, of not having to come back again to reincarnate, to learn more lessons. But you can choose to stay in third if you want to, even if you're fourth density, but that's called being a wanderer, which is another concept.
Yeah, I remember him talking about that. I thought that was a very interesting concept.
It shows, again, I like the term wild card for third density, because it kind of best encompasses what third density is for the soul, in that even after you graduate from third density, because this density is so incredibly intense and difficult. In fact, in one session, they asked Ra about the difference in difficulty. And I think they mean like suffering and challenge.
Polarity, probably.
Like what's the difference in difficulty from a third to a fourth density lifetime? And they say the third density is at least somewhat about 100 times more difficult in terms of the rub, the contrast, the polarity that's available here. When you're in fourth, you're fully positively polarized. So you're kind of in that position where you already know everything is one. There's less novelty for your soul in that way, and you're trying to refine at that point.
Yeah.
So more advanced souls, like fifth and even sixth density souls, will choose to spend a lifetime or two, or sometimes more, going back into third density, because when you come to third density, you got to play by the rules, meaning you're going to go through the clean sweep. Your soul's not going to remember, I'm this advanced soul coming back here to be of service. You start from scratch like everybody else. But the difference with a higher density being is you're obviously bringing a much higher frequency with you. And so the likelihood you're going to wake up to institutional corruption, religious corruption, and these things are way, way higher than a native third density soul. But so getting back to the teachings, I'll just capitalize it on this, is that they say that everything that happens is technically a catalyst, meaning that every decision you make, every situation you encounter in life is presenting you with a choice point. And there's just really two choices, love or non-love, right? So how are you going to choose to respond to that situation? And so they say, if you accept the catalyst that life is offering you, that's the first step to being able to start to learn from it and process it. And what's the deeper meaning here? What lessons is life asking me to learn through this experience? And that's the know thyself. And when you put those together, you can start responding to your life catalyst in a way where you're not just here to alleviate karma anymore, but you're more in the driver's seat of becoming the creator. And so Ra stresses catalyst integration as the number one spiritual practice for polarizing.
That, by the way,
I couldn't agree more with. Go ahead.
Sorry, by the way, that's why my system's called Spirit Gym.
Right.
Because the same way we need resistance to grow physically, what Ra calls a catalyst, I call the resistance for growth emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. So Spirit Gym is really all about how to work with the resistance that we have to grow.
Yep.
And I wanted to say,
back to,
I was going to share one other thing on souls and past lives, because I've investigated this quite a lot, because I have a lot of past life memories and awarenesses of past lives. And I've done professional regressions as well as my own self-governed regression through my soul. But my soul told me that to the degree that your authentic orientation is to love, support, and help others, each soul will remember past life knowledge, wisdom, and experiences to the degree that it will help them help other people.
Yeah.
And that is the kind of the way the soul unlocks its past life memories. But anyway, I just wanted to share that because there are lots of people that do remember past lives, but most people don't. And so there's the concept, I think Ra talks about it, but others do as well, drinking from the river of forgetfulness when you come into this third dimension reality.
Yes. Yeah, the veil of forgetfulness.
Yeah.
That's something else the law one helped me to understand as well, is the kind of just the ingenious design of the universe and the metaphysics of it all, is that it's designed in such a perfect way where, for example, the powers that come with the positive polarity, such as telepathy and reading people's minds and being able to lift objects with your mind and all this stuff, like imagine how devastating those powers could be if somebody on the negative polarity could do that, or if a person in third
Bill
density
Gates?
who's not really what's that?
You mean Bill Gates, Anthony Fauci,
Right.
etc.?
Right. Well,
George
see, that's the
Soros.
thing, is like, the negative polarity has their own powers, and
Yes.
they really rely on manipulation, deception, and shadow work
Illusion.
and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Illusion. But the positive polarity can directly influence reality in these ways, but not until you've achieved that heart chakra activation.
Mhm.
So like you said, it's the bridge. It's the love that we have for self and other that prevents us from using these powers in consciousness in a deleterious or damaging way. And I think that's really cool.
It is. And Manly P. Hall, I can't remember which book of his I was reading, but he has a very good section on magic. And he gives very clear distinctions between black magic and white magic, and between MAGIC and MAGICK. Unfortunately, the Christian church wiped out as much MAGICK as they possibly could, which they called paganism. But what we call Wicca today is essentially what paganism was as a spiritual practice in the past.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, so I'll wrap up with the catalyst thing by saying this, that the basic way to summarize it or boil it down and simplify it is learning from your life lessons. Paying attention to your life is the best thing you can do to grow spiritually while you're here, because life is the supreme guru. We all have a guru that's bringing us the perfect lesson at every moment. Just like if you were sitting before a sage like Ramana Maharshi or something, life is always reading your mail and knows exactly what to bring to you. But if you're not in the attitude of acceptance and openness towards life, but you're in resistance to life, well, then you've completely blocked yourself from being able to learn anything. And so the consequence of that, Ra says, is that every catalyst it's almost like the catalysts from our life hit our energy centers and they go up the channel and they're processed, right?
Yeah.
By each successive energy center. And Ra says every catalyst hits the root chakra first and progresses upwards from there. And based on how distorted or undistorted your energy centers are, the more ability you have in consciousness to process, learn, and polarize from each catalyst. And so they say if a catalyst isn't accepted, meaning you're meeting something happening in your life with resistance and judgment and not trusting, then it doesn't progress really past the root chakra or those lower three chakras at best. And so they get increasingly twisted up and distorted with every life experience you have that you're not accepting and processing. And they say that's what leads to physical disease and things.
Yeah.
Is there's so much blocked energy in your body from all the life catalysts you haven't processed. And I'm like, oh, there's a perfect kind of metaphysical explanation for trauma.
Yeah.
Trauma is unprocessed, undigested experience.
Or catalyst. I've spent my life working with traumatized people, and I was quite badly traumatized as a child. But I think that, I just think that trauma is something we can work with, but in all fairness to a lot of people and the kind of the cultural environment we're in the world, a lot of people can't find people to help them work with their traumas in healthy ways. And there's so much money being made on keeping people traumatized.
Religion?
And the medical system.
Yeah, that too.
And
well,
others.
I had this epiphany, Paul. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I had this epiphany about the trauma that Christianity as a religion or a thought system really does to people is that, and I had to go back to my own childhood of how was my experience of this idea that Jesus had to be violently slaughtered on a cross just so that God can forgive me. And when I really go back to my, earliest days in church and getting acquainted with this concept, I experienced so much fear and shame in myself from reconnecting to that because even though Christians mean well, and I don't think that any of them really know that they're traumatizing kids by teaching this stuff, but nonetheless, the nature of what you're teaching children when they look at the cross and this message of Jesus died for my sins, we keep it on the surface level of like, isn't that great that Jesus died for your sins? Well, how beautiful. And we're supposed to put the focus on that. But that's because what that implies about God is so freaking horrifying and traumatizing that it means that when I look at the cross, when anybody looks at the cross, subconsciously, the message that's being conveyed to us is that's how much God hates you. That's what God wanted to do to you for your sins. But then God, older brother Jesus, stepped in at the last moment and took your punishment from angry stepdad. You're like, wow, God wanted to do that to me, but Jesus stepped in my place. That's a very traumatizing realization or feeling for a young child, even for an adult to have. But imagine the impression on the psyche that imprints in a child. It's like, no wonder so many people stay stuck in religion their entire life because that imprint is so deep at that age. And the fear it instills that so many people in religion are just too afraid to dare risking going beyond that. Because if they're wrong, it proves that initial trauma of God hates me and wants to punish me like he punished Jesus.
Yeah, it's really sad, but a lot of people, because they don't study enough, don't know that the concept of the cross is far more ancient than Christianity. And Steiner, have you ever heard Steiner's explanation of the cross?
I believe I have, but refresh me.
Steiner says that from the ground, the part of the cross that's planted in the earth up to the horizontal beam represents the part that's in the ground is the mineral kingdom. The part up to the horizontal beam is the plant kingdom. The horizontal beam represents the animal's spine. Most animals' spines are horizontal to the earth.
Oh, wow.
And the part above the horizontal represents the human head. And so he describes that the cross is really a symbol of our evolution and God's evolution through the material plane, matter, into the biological plane, into a growing consciousness of self and the creativity of nature in the animal kingdom. And then the human, because the human whole body of the human being is a cosmic antenna. When the spine comes upright, now we go from being horizontal, which is parallel to the magnetic field, to being in line with the electric field, so that we are actually able to get cosmic concepts, inspirations, intuitions, and thoughts that the animal kingdom, because its antenna system is not oriented to that, can only have unconsciously. So the cross in Steiner's conception is not anything like the Christians think, like you've just described, but it's sort of a symbol to honor and respect the fact that we have all made this evolutionary journey. And that the other conception that's not from Steiner, but from other studies and from my own investigations, is that the vertical beam of the cross represents the zero dimension of eternal, the eternal now. The horizontal dimension of the cross is the past. The middle is the ever-present now. And the right, if you're facing across, is the future. And that the crucifixion is to go from eternal oneness with God into time so that we can actually become conscious of what we are and become co-creators. So there you see the marriage of time and eternity, that basically once the crucifixion is to come out of eternal consciousness or now consciousness into time, because we sacrifice our consciousness of connection to the all to become an individual expression of God. And so the cross is that we have to deal with the catalysts and the history and the growth process in time so that we can dream ourselves into higher states of consciousness in each moment, which is the future. So those are two completely different conceptions of the cross that help make this conscious process of evolution and reuniting to the one. Because another thing that correlates to this is that people don't realize this, but if you get Charles Fillmore's metaphysical Christian dictionary, which is excellent. Have you ever heard of that dictionary? It's very good.
I love Fillmore. Yeah.
Yeah. And so what Fillmore makes very clear is that the word Christ is not a name, it's a title. Like CEO is a title. And that the word Christ has many definitions. There's probably about 12 he gives in there, but the one that is most important is that the word Christ means one who is united with the all. So
love it.
Jesus Christ is a man who became united with the all and could share that experience with others. Jesus is lessly important than the story of how he became united with the all, which is what he's trying to offer us. And
yeah, I often like to say, like, as inspiring as Jesus was, that's not what inspired Jesus himself. You know, Jesus was what he was because he knew I and my Father are one,
right?
Not because he confessed Jesus as his Lord and Savior.
Well, also he, as you know, he says, "Split the wood and I will be there; lift the stone and I will be there." So he's saying I as one with God, where I am everywhere. You don't need to be in a church. Paradoxically, you are the universe is the church. You're the church.
Yeah.
You are the church. Yeah. But he also says the kingdom of heaven is before you and men do not see it. So there's the crucifixion. You see, that's coming out of the eternal now, which would be the ultimate heaven, into time and into individuality. And there's the animal spine. So, you know, if you go to the Greek conception of the Minotaur, there's the animal body, the man with the animal with a torso and a head. So you got a human head and torso, but an animal body. And Jung speaks about this extensively, that part of our spiritual evolution is to overcome our instinctual drives and our purely reflexive behaviors to be able to think rationally, right? And so you can say that we're in a process of conscious evolution from the animal instinctual drives and sort of a limited capacity for perception to a much grander view of who and what we are and why we're here. And I think that's really more the crucifixion is coming into this, you know, because when you're a soul, you're ultimately unconditional love. So you're everywhere and nowhere at the same time. For a soul to come into a body is like stuffing a genie in a bottle. So imagine if you could take a drop of the essence of the entire cosmos and you put it into a bottle. That's like metaphorically stuffing God into a little tiny body. So there's quite a transition for a soul to come from oneness into individuality. And I think a lot of kids have a hard time with that. You know, I've known many, many stories because they've been relayed to me directly from people, but I'll give you an example. I connected with each of the souls of my children when Angie got pregnant, and because I wanted to know who was choosing us as their parents and why. And both of them told us why they were coming. But Mana, in his last lifetime, was a woman, and he lived in Thailand around, I think, late 1400s, early 1500s. But they were under, I think, fascist or communist type rule. And he was a farmer. And because there was so much pressure from the rulers at that time to produce, because they would take all the food from them to feed the armies and stuff.
Yeah.
And one day they were pissed off at the family because they said they weren't producing enough rice. And I think it was either Mana's mother or father, said something back to them like, you're being unfair to us. We can't do any more work than we are. It's not possible. And so they killed them all. They killed them all right then and there. And Mana was the only one left, and they made Mana farm the whole farm by himself. So now I had this conception. Mana never knew this. I'd never told this to Mana. And when he was about 3 or 4, we were driving down the road one day, and he's sitting in the back of the car, and me and Angie are in the front. She's driving. I'm sitting in the passenger seat. And all of a sudden, Mana says, out of the blue, he goes, "Did you guys know that I used to be a farmer?" And we went, "What?"
Oh my gosh.
"Tell us more about." He said, "Oh yeah, I know all about farming." He said, "I used to work with plants, and I know a lot about the soil." And he went on this whole thing about his whole life as a farmer. And
incredible.
We were just shocked. It was like, wow, this is wild stuff. But kids have this come through them, and they start losing it around 5 beyond, because the ego starts to form, and they start being often judged for saying things that mom and dad say, "Oh, that's not true," and things like that. So they shut down. But we also had a ghost in the house we lived in. It was the grandfather of the people. He had died there, and he would be walking around all the time and hanging out in the garden. And Mana could see him, and he would talk to him, and Mana would be out in the garden having full-on conversations with him, and
wow.
I'm clairvoyant.
Did you ever eavesdrop?
Oh yeah. I mean, I didn't go stand there, but I was like in the house looking out the window, and I can see the guy. He'd be in the house quite often too. And Angie can see him too. But my point is, kids are often interacting with souls from other dimensions, or souls that haven't moved on, or souls that want to come back and visit. But if they tell most parents that, then the kids get told, "Oh, you're being silly," or "You're crazy," or "There's no such thing," or "It's just your imagination." So kids start losing their capacity to connect to other dimensions, because they're being diminished for telling about it. So it makes them feel like something's wrong with them. But I think most kids are born completely tapped in. I think too, because there's a softening of this kind of religious constriction. People they're opening up to spirituality. Most religions are on the decline, although COVID has kicked religious participation back up. The reason for that being is whenever people are afraid, and they're afraid for their life, especially, their consciousness reverts back to the unconscious level, where they have automatic programming. They want certainties, and they don't. And it's a survival strategy, because the brain uses 80% of the available blood sugar anytime it's cognitively engaged. So in nature, where there was times where we were starving to death, we were in wars, there was famines. So we always revert back to the unconscious, because it's extremely efficient. It's an automatic reaction. Mm-hmm. This is why I say to my students, don't throw in a cartwheel when you're running from a lion. That's not a time to be creative. You'll climb.
There's some good life advice.
Yeah, you'll climb a tree so fast you won't even know how you got up it. Yeah, so there's the unconscious kicking in as a survival instinct. So like during COVID, we saw all sorts of born again Christians coming online, and J.P. Sears became a Christian. Then Russell Brand got into Christianity. A lot of them, right? Because that just shows you how afraid they are. So they go back to an outdated philosophy that's full of just as many problems as they're running from without realizing it. But we can only have empathy for them.
On that, I think that's going to accelerate the decline of Christianity inevitably, because when you have people like a Russell Brand, like a mind like his,
they'll question.
He's not going to. He's not going to stay stuck in the dogma for very long before he's going to start seeing through it. And then imagine Russell Brand making content about deconstructing fundamentalism and stuff. Yeah. And you've got an exponential, these people are going to wake up at some point. I think life was using COVID to pull them into religion for a bit. Yeah. Same with JP and others, to spit them out and go, "Oh, I just learned a lot. Let me tell you about it."
Yeah, and Jordan Peterson got more heavy into the Bible during the pandemic as well. And it was clear that he was scared to death. But
I think our planet has associated the Bible and religion with God for so long.
Yeah.
It's still kind of the hardwired foundation of the way the human collective consciousness thinks, that when people saw the levels of evil that were unleashed during the pandemic, it terrified enough people to say, I need God, I need truth, I need certainty.
Yeah.
And what do people associate with God? The Bible and religion. And so a lot of people ran that way. But again, I think those people are going to, at some point, there's too much connection now. We have the internet, we have social media. It's so hard to stay in a little tight, vacuum sealed Christian bubble world.
Or any religious bubble world.
Or any bubble world, and not be exposed to the questioning and the other thought systems surrounding it.
Yeah.
So I think the time of man being able to sequester itself in a religion is just long gone on our planet.
I also think that the Biden and Harris administration so wiped out the field of value and morality and virtue that people went back to, shall we say, root religion and religious ideology, because at least there's a sense of right and wrong, morality, virtue, and and a shared sense of connection to a group that's in resonance with your morals, ethics, and virtues. And there's a lot of safety in that. It's like when a person doesn't have a deep enough relationship with God themselves to feel safe alone, they need that container. And I think all the founders of the world religions, I believe, really had good intentions for people. They all had their own enlightenment experiences. And the function of a dogma is actually to concretize the practices that led the founder to union with God.
Right.
And that's what a dogma really is. But when a dogma gets taken over to use it to control people's minds and get money out of them, then we don't have religion anymore. We now have corporate religion, which is a completely different animal that's destroyed the concept of religion and has led to a lot of people leaving religion, which is why I'm waiting for you to start your own
I'm working on it. Trust me.
Yeah. I think, as I said to you before, you're the guy to do it. Hopefully many like you. There's a guy that I did a podcast named Ryan Meeks. He's got a story almost identical to yours. His father was a Christian. Yeah, his father was the head of a mega church, and he came into crisis because he could not deal with all the contradictions in the Bible. And then he went off on his own, even when he was making a lot of money, because he started his own church and his father set him up, and he had 8 million members or some crazy thing. So he was doing financially very well and very successful, but he had a crisis of self. And then he got into plant medicines and had an awakening through plant medicine. So my whole podcast with him is about that journey. It's really quite good. I think you'd find it fascinating.
That sounds juicy. I mean, plant medicine's played a big part in my own deconstruction of Christianity as well.
Yeah, well, they're there for a reason. I say God leaves clues everywhere, and there they are.
And there they are.
Well, what a phenomenal journey we've had together. I can't say thank you enough. Aaron, what a blessing. I'm really grateful that you're doing what you're doing. I really enjoyed all the podcasts I've looked into on you, and Mimi and Chase really said, Paul, you would enjoy Aaron. He'd be a great guest on your podcast. And I'm sorry it took me so long, but my life has been moving at warp speed. So I finally thought,
I'm with you, man.
I think Mimi and Chase said, hey, have you ever reached out to Aaron? And this was, a while back. And I said, God, I keep intending to, but I just forget to. So here we are, and it won't be the last time I'll have you on here. We got lots to talk about. Where can people find you, and what would you like to share as we close as far as contacts, websites, anything like that?
Yeah, well, I fully agree that this is just the tip of the iceberg, and I just love hearing your incredibly unique and profoundly wise reflections on these things. That,
thank you.
The law of one is something I know very well, and have taught for a long time. But when I speak with you about it, it's like I'm getting a whole new look into the law of one from a different perspective. So definitely can't wait to do this again. To get in contact with me, it's pretty much the same everywhere. It's just Aaron Abke. So aaronabke.com, Instagram, X, YouTube, Aaron Abke, pretty simple.
ABKE, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Or you can go to 4duniversity.com as well.
Okay, good. Very good. Well, what a blessing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, man.
Thank you to all the listeners for taking the journey with us. I hope you guys feel inspired to embody everything that you can from our dialogue today. And if you have questions, that's fantastic. Like if you doubt anything you heard, go sit in contemplative meditation and connect to your heart and ask your soul to guide you, and go do some reading, go do some read The Law of One for yourself. It's a 5-book series, but it's badass. You can listen to it on audio. It's fucking phenomenal, man. I can't,
life-changing.
There's a time to say fuck, and it's right there in front of phenomenal.
I concur.
It's really beautiful. And I think, you and Edmund Knighton both know that teaching inside out and backwards. And I got to hook you up with Edmund. You want to meet an evolved soul. I'll hook you up with Edmund. This guy's the real deal, man. And
I've heard.
Yeah. And he's very, very schooled and skilled and practiced in Steiner's teaching. So my podcast with Edmund about the correlations and differences between Steiner and Ra, which I think you'd find fascinating as well.
I definitely would. Yeah. I'll check that one out.
Yeah. Well, lots of love. Thank you to my sponsors for your awesome products, for all the love and money you put into the hands of organic, free range, and biodynamic farmers. Thank you for each of you for what you buy from the sponsors to take care of yourself so you can be the change the world needs now. Thank you, because anything you buy supports the podcast, which helps me take the time out of my schedule to create the podcast for you. And I look forward to sharing something exciting and interesting with you next week. And I will say, Aho, Great Spirit. It is done. It is done. It is done. We are safe. We are home. We are whole. Aho. Thank you, Aaron.
Aho.
Love you, buddy.
Love you too, brother. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'll look forward to our next one.
Likewise.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Spirit Gym with Paul Chek and today's guest, Aaron Abke. Visit Aaron's website at aaronabke.com. That's AARONABKE.com. And also at 4duniversity.com. Connect with him on Instagram, X, and YouTube at Aaron Abke. If you are looking for a community where you can share ideas and ask questions about topics discussed in this podcast, then check out Paul's Spirit Gym program and community. Memberships start at less than $8 a month, and you can get access to exclusive members-only opportunities from Paul's guests, live Q&A sessions with Paul and his guests, access to the podcast members forum within the Spirit Gym community, where you can interact with other passionate listeners, and the chance to purchase exclusive Spirit Gym merchandise. You can subscribe today by going to paulchek.com/podcast. or explore the higher levels of membership at myspiritgym.com. And finally, if you enjoyed today's episode, please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and a warm review on the podcast platform of your choice. This podcast is available on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible, and YouTube.